The snow had started falling around 8 p.m., soft flakes drifting lazily down onto the streets of Wexford, a small town in upstate New York. It was New Year's Eve, and for most of the town, that meant parties, laughter, and the occasional firework. For Jacob Miller, it meant driving home from his late shift at the local convenience store. His little red sedan skidded along the icy roads, headlights cutting through the white haze, as he mentally prepared himself for a quiet evening alone. His wife, Claire, had gone to her sister's house for a last-minute celebration, and their daughter, Lily, was with a friend. As he turned onto his street, Jacob noticed something unusual. The town seemed quieter than usual, almost eerily so. No distant music, no laughter from neighbors, not even the occasional car horn, just the soft crunch of his tires on the fresh snow. As he slowed near his driveway, he saw a figure at the edge of the woods across the street. At first, he thought it might be someone walking a dog, but there was no dog, and the figure didn't move like a human. It stood perfectly still, arms hanging loosely, body unnaturally straight. The snow falling around it didn't seem to touch it. Jacob blinked, and when he looked again, it was gone. Shaking his head, he told himself it was a trick of the shadows and pulled into the driveway. The house was dark, silent, and cold. He stepped inside, hanging his coat and shaking off the snow. Everything seemed normal at first. The living room light flickered as he switched it on, the fireplace crackled, and the smell of Claire's leftover cookies lingered faintly in the kitchen. But then he noticed the back door, slightly ajar, though he was certain he'd locked it that morning. His heart thudded as he approached it, and when he looked out, the yard was empty, the snow undisturbed. No footprints, nothing to suggest someone had been there. He shrugged and closed the door, locking it again. But the unease lingered, a cold finger tracing down his spine. He tried to settle into a movie, but every shadow in the room seemed sharper, darker. The ticking of the old clock in the hallway grew louder, more insistent, until it sounded like footsteps pacing just outside. At 11:30 p.m., Jacob decided to check on Lily, calling her cell. The line was dead. He tried Claire's number, also dead. A tight knot of fear began forming in his chest. Then came the first knock, slow, deliberate, from the front door. Not a single tap, but a rhythmic pounding that made the whole house shudder. Jacob's pulse spiked as he cautiously approached the door. "Who is it?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. Silence. Another knock, louder, almost testing the strength of the door itself. He gripped the doorknob and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The yard was empty. Snow drifted gently in the pale glow of the streetlight, but he could feel eyes on him. Something was watching. Suddenly, a high-pitched wail echoed from the woods behind the house, cutting through the night like shattered glass. Jacob stumbled backward, heart hammering, and for a brief moment the lights flickered, revealing shadows moving just beyond the tree line. Not animals, not human. They twisted and shifted unnaturally, limbs bending at impossible angles. Their faces, or what should have been faces, were featureless, dark voids, except for the faintest glimmer of red like embers glowing in the snow. He backed away from the door, fumbling for his phone, but all he could see was static on the screen. The front door rattled violently, then quieted. Jacob's instinct screamed at him to leave, to drive to the nearest gas station or police station. But when he tried the car keys, they slipped from his hands. He picked them up again. Then the car horn blared on its own, startling him so badly he stumbled to the floor. Jacob tried to calm himself, telling himself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even snow affecting the wiring. He made his way to the kitchen to grab a knife, his last line of defense. And that's when he noticed the handprints on the windows, large, distorted, as if pressed from the outside. But no one was there. The snow around the house remained undisturbed, except for occasional depressions near the tree line, like someone or something was circling, staying just out of sight. The knocking returned, this time from the back door, then from the windows. Jacob backed into the living room, the knife clutched tight, scanning the room for anything that could help him fight. The shadows in the corners seemed to twitch and stretch toward him. Then he heard it. The whispering. Soft at first, unintelligible, like wind through broken branches, but gradually growing louder, forming words he couldn't quite comprehend. It seemed to come from every direction, even inside the house. He realized, in a moment of paralyzing horror, that the clock had stopped, not a slow ticking, completely frozen at 11:58 p.m. Time itself seemed to have halted. The air grew heavier, each breath a struggle, as the whispering escalated into a chorus of voices, overlapping, shouting, laughing, and crying all at once. Then came the smell, metallic, coppery, like blood mixed with rust, seeping from the walls themselves. Jacob ran to the basement, thinking of hiding, hoping to barricade himself until morning. As he descended, the lights flickered and died, leaving him in darkness. The whispering followed him down, louder now, accompanied by scratching sounds that seemed to come from the very walls. Something passed behind him, cold and invisible, brushing against his shoulder. He screamed, swinging the knife blindly, hitting only empty air. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. He could hear faint thumps above him as if something was pacing, waiting. And then the silence. Deafening, unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the basement pipe. Jacob dared to breathe, listening. The front door creaked slowly, opening and closing on its own. He tried to call out to Claire and Lily, but no sound came from his throat. It was as if his voice had been stolen. When he finally summoned the courage to look outside through the small basement window, he froze. The street was no longer familiar. Houses were empty, doors ajar, lights flickering in distorted patterns, and the snow, once pristine, was now filled with hundreds of footprints. Not human footprints, but elongated, twisted impressions that seemed to defy normal anatomy. They crisscrossed the street, leading toward the woods, then disappearing entirely. Jacob's fear morphed into a desperate need to escape. He ran up the stairs, knife in hand, but the living room was no longer the living room. The walls stretched and warped, the furniture elongated as if viewed through a funhouse mirror. The fireplace roared to life, flames twisting unnaturally, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to move independently. Among them he could see figures emerging from the darkness outside, now visible fully, their forms skeletal, with limbs bent at impossible angles and eyes glowing red. He bolted for the front door, finally managing to open it. Snow fell, but it wasn't normal snow. It moved against the wind, drifting toward him like liquid. The creatures outside didn't move as one might expect. They hovered, gliding over the snow, circling him, keeping a careful distance, observing. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt frozen, his mind trapped in a fog of terror. A figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, its movements jerky, unnatural. Its glowing red eyes locked on him, and the whispering grew deafening, chanting words he couldn't comprehend. Jacob stumbled backward, tripping over the threshold, and the figure paused, tilting its head. Then it vanished. The others followed, retreating into the woods, leaving only the whispering echoing in the cold air. Jacob didn't understand how long he stood there. Time had no meaning anymore. When morning finally arrived, the town appeared normal again. Snow blanketed the streets, untouched, quiet. No footprints, no evidence of what had happened, except Jacob himself, frozen in the middle of the street, shaking. He ran to the nearest house, neighbors awake, cars in driveways, life seemingly untouched. But no one would believe him. He tried to explain, but the words failed him. His wife and daughter returned that evening, oblivious, laughing about their celebrations, asking why he looked so pale. Jacob never spoke of that night again, though the memory never left him. Every New Year's Eve since, he notices the quiet first, the unnatural quiet that comes before the world remembers to celebrate. And every year, without fail, when the clock nears midnight, he feels the eyes again, watching from the edge of the woods, waiting for him to notice, waiting for another New Year's Eve to claim. Story the end. The snow fell thick and fast that New Year's Eve in rural Vermont, blanketing the quiet town of Pine Ridge in a heavy, suffocating silence. The kind of snow that muffled every sound, turning the world into a frozen white prison. Noah had driven through it for hours, leaving Boston behind to spend the holiday with his childhood friend, Lucas. They hadn't spoken much over the past few years, but the promise of a small, isolated cabin and an intimate New Year's celebration had sounded like a welcome escape from the city chaos. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, half buried under snowdrifts. Its wooden exterior, dark and weathered, blended into the surrounding pine forest. Lucas met Noah outside, bundled in a thick coat, his breath steaming in the cold air. "You made it?" he said, smiling, but his eyes had a tension Noah didn't recognize. It was a nightmare driving through this storm, Noah replied, shaking the snow from his jacket. But it's worth it. Lucas led him inside. The cabin smelled of old wood and pine, with a faint undertone of smoke. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting shadows that danced against the walls. It looked cozy, almost comforting, and for a moment Noah felt a strange sense of relief. But there was an oddness in the way Lucas moved, too stiff, too precise, like he was anticipating something. They spent the afternoon preparing for the evening. Lucas unpacked beer and snacks while Noah stoked the fire. The snow outside continued to fall relentlessly, piling against the windows, cutting them off from the world. When darkness fell, the cabin was illuminated only by the fire and a single lamp in the corner. Lucas suggested they play some music. Noah pulled up a playlist on his phone, a mix of classic rock and indie tunes. As the songs played, Lucas began to tell stories about their high school days, laughing about old pranks, but Noah noticed the laughter never quite reached Lucas's eyes. There was a shadow behind them, a subtle unease that crawled over Noah's skin. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Noah froze. "Did you hear that?" Lucas shrugged. "Probably just the wind." The knock came again, slow, deliberate, and louder this time. Lucas's jaw tightened. "No one's on this road. There's nobody out there." Noah's heart pounded. "Should we check?" Lucas grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the door. The wind screamed into the cabin and snow poured in, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no figures, nothing except the endless white of the forest. He closed the door quickly, but the feeling lingered, a cold knot of fear in Noah's stomach. They tried to ignore it, returning to their beers and music, but then they heard it. A soft tapping sound, like fingernails against the window panes. Tap, tap, tap. Noah turned toward the sound, heart hammering. He saw a shadowy figure outside, barely visible through the thick snow, standing perfectly still. Its head tilted unnaturally, and it didn't move even when the wind shifted. "Lucas, do you see that?" Noah whispered. Lucas didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was tight. "Move away from the window." The tapping continued, moving now to the back of the cabin. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone or something was testing them. Noah felt the blood drain from his face. It's circling the cabin," he said, voice shaking. They barricaded the doors and windows as best they could. The snowstorm outside howled like a living thing, and the tapping continued, now accompanied by a low scratching that made Noah's teeth chatter. It was impossible for anyone to be out there, not in this storm, and yet the sounds were real, undeniable. Around 11, the power flickered. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the firelight. Shadows leapt across the walls in grotesque shapes. Noah tried to call for help, but his phone had no signal. Lucas was pale, silent, his eyes darting to every corner. Then from the far end of the cabin came a voice, a whisper, soft and raspy. "Let us in." Noah spun toward it, flashlight in hand. The beam illuminated the corner, but there was nothing. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. "Who's there?" No answer, just the whisper again. "Let us in." Lucas grabbed Noah's arm. "Don't answer it. Don't talk to it." The whispering grew louder, multiplied, filling the cabin with dozens of voices all speaking at once. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the floorboards, from the shadows. Noah could feel them crawling under his skin, pressing against his skull. "Lucas, we have to leave," Noah said, voice shaking. "Now." Lucas nodded, though fear had made him nearly motionless. They threw on their coats and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The snow had packed against it too tightly. Panic surged. They ran to the windows, trying to break them, but the glass seemed impossibly strong, as if resisting them. Then the fire flickered violently, and the shadows on the walls stretched and twisted, forming shapes that were vaguely human but horribly wrong. Faces without features, limbs too long, heads bending at impossible angles. They moved with a fluid, unnatural motion, advancing toward the two men. Noah screamed, banging on the walls, trying to find an exit. The whispers turned into chanting, low and guttural. Lucas grabbed a chair and tried to defend them, but the figures were already inside the room, sliding over the floor, merging with the shadows. Time distorted. Moments stretched into hours, though it could have only been minutes. Noah felt himself slipping into a kind of numb terror, watching the figures encircle them. One reached out, long, pale fingers touching the back of his neck. Cold. Deadly. And then silence. The fire went out. The chanting stopped. The snowstorm outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself held its breath. Noah and Lucas collapsed against each other, shaking, unable to speak. They stayed that way until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the windows. When they finally dared to look outside, the snow had cleared slightly, revealing the untouched forest. No footprints, no signs of anything or anyone ever being there. But the cabin door was now ajar, hanging loosely on its hinges. They didn't speak as they packed their things. The drive back to town was silent, the highway empty. Noah tried to rationalize it, hallucinations, fear, isolation, but Lucas's pale, haunted expression told him otherwise. Whatever had been in that cabin with them was real, and it had followed them, even if only in memory. For weeks afterward, Noah couldn't sleep. Every time the wind howled through the city streets, he swore he could hear faint tapping, whispering, calling his name. When he returned home to Boston, he found a single snowflake pressed against the window pane of his apartment, though it wasn't snowing. And every New Year's Eve, without fail, Noah finds himself checking the corners of the room, listening for whispers, for tapping, for the figures he saw in that cabin, waiting for the next winter storm to bring them back. Story the end. I used to think New Year's Eve was harmless. Loud, sure. Drunk people, fireworks, bad music, countdowns. Nobody really remembers. The night always felt like a reset button you could press without consequences. That belief died the year my sister disappeared, and every January 1st since then feels like a lie we all agreed to keep telling. It happened in a town most people would pass through without noticing. A place in western Pennsylvania where the snow turns gray as soon as it hits the ground, and the houses all look like they were built by the same tired hand. We grew up there. I moved away for college, but my sister Erin stayed. She worked at a dental office, rented a small duplex near the river, and liked routine. New Year's Eve wasn't even her holiday. She usually stayed home, watched old movies, and went to bed before midnight. That year was different. She called me on December 30th, said she'd been invited to a party by a coworker who just moved to town. Just a few people, she said. Nothing crazy. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, like she was already regretting agreeing. I told her to go anyway. I told her it might be good to do something new. I regret that more than anything. The party was supposed to be at an old house on Ridgeway Road, a narrow stretch that curves into the woods just outside town. Erin texted me a photo when she arrived. The house looked wrong, even through the phone screen. Too dark, too big for the number of cars parked out front. All the windows were black except for one upstairs, glowing faintly yellow, like a single open eye. Creepy, but kinda cool, she texted. At 10:17 p.m., she sent another message. This place is weird. Might leave early. I responded immediately, but she didn't read it. That was the last time I heard from her. At first, nobody panicked. New Year's Eve swallows people whole. Phones die. People crash on couches. Erin was an adult. She had every right to disappear for a night. But when she didn't show up for work on January 2nd and her car wasn't at her place, the police got involved. They questioned the coworker who invited her, a woman named Melissa, who claimed she left the party around midnight. She said Erin was still there, sitting on the back porch, smoking a cigarette and watching the fireworks over the trees. That detail stuck with me. Erin hated smoking. She'd quit years earlier and never touched another cigarette. The police searched the house on Ridgeway Road. The owners were an older couple who claimed they rented it out occasionally for gatherings. They said they were out of town that night. The place was empty when the police arrived, stripped bare of furniture like it had never been lived in at all. No decorations, no trash, no signs of a party, just clean floors and the faint smell of bleach. The case went cold faster than anyone admitted out loud. Months passed, then a year. People stopped asking how my family was doing and started avoiding eye contact altogether. Erin's duplex sat empty. Her mail piled up until I finally forwarded it to my place. Life kept going in the cruel way it always does. I tried to forget New Year's Eve, but it didn't forget me. On December 31st, the following year, I was driving back through town to visit my parents. Snow fell lightly, blurring the road into something almost peaceful. I took Ridgeway Road without thinking, my headlights cutting through the trees like tunnels of white. As I rounded the bend near the old house, I saw a single car parked out front, My stomach dropped. The house looked exactly the same. Dark, silent. One upstairs window lit with that same weak yellow glow. I told myself it meant nothing. Houses don't disappear. Windows don't hold memories. I kept driving. That night, after my parents went to bed, I couldn't sleep. At 11:58 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Happy almost New Year. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might split my ribs. I stared at the screen, waiting for something else to appear. Another message came through. You told me to go. My hands went numb. I typed back with shaking fingers. Aaron? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Come get me. The address that followed was Ridgeway Road. I didn't wake my parents. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me knew they wouldn't come. Maybe some part of me knew this wasn't something they could fix. I drove. The road was empty, the trees closing in tighter than I remembered. When I pulled up to the house, the car I'd seen earlier was gone. The front door stood open, a thin line of light spilling onto the snow. I called Aaron's name until my voice cracked. No answer. Inside, the house was warm, too warm. The air smelled faintly sweet, like old perfume. The walls were bare, but the floor was covered in footprints, dozens of them overlapping, leading toward the back. The sound of laughter drifted through the house, distant but clear. A party, somehow hidden just out of sight. I followed the noise to the back door and stepped onto the porch. The woods beyond were alive with light. Fireworks burst silently above the trees, exploding in slow motion, their colors bleeding into the darkness. People stood scattered among the trees, facing away from me, all of them perfectly still. I recognized Erin's coat immediately. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her shoulders slumped, her hair hanging loose down her back. I ran toward her, my boots crunching loudly, but she didn't turn. "Erin," I whispered, afraid to raise my voice. When she finally looked at me, her face was wrong. Not injured, not decayed, just empty. Her eyes reflected the fireworks like glass. "You came late," she said. I tried to grab her, but my hands passed through her arms like smoke. Cold rushed through me, sharp and biting. She gestured toward the others. As the fireworks continued, they turned one by one, faces I half recognized. Missing people from flyers that had once covered telephone poles. Some were young, some were old. All of them wore the same hollow expression. "We stay until the countdown," Aaron said. "Then it starts again." A clock chimed somewhere in the woods. 11:59. I begged her to come with me. I screamed until my throat burned. She only shook her head. "You told me to go," she said again, softer this time. The final second ticked away. The fireworks exploded all at once, sound crashing down like thunder. The light was blinding. I covered my eyes, sobbing. When I looked again, the clearing was empty. I woke up in my car, parked crookedly in the snow in front of the house. The front door was closed. The upstairs window was dark. My phone buzzed at exactly midnight. "Happy New Year." The message was sent from Aaron's number. I reported everything. The texts, the house, the clearing. The police listened politely and wrote it all down, the same way they always had. Nothing came of it. Every New Year's Eve since then, my phone buzzes just before midnight. Always the same message, always from a blocked or unknown number. "You can still come get me. I never go back. I know better now. Some doors don't close when the year changes." Story. The end. The year it happened, New Year's Eve fell on a Friday, and the cold sat over western Pennsylvania like a lid. The snow wasn't deep, just enough to dull the edges of everything, and the sky had that dirty, low-hanging look that made the streetlights glow like bruises. I remember because I had to scrape my windshield twice before it would clear, and my fingers went numb through my gloves. I was late leaving the house, late enough that my mother called and told me to slow down, that the roads would still be there in the morning. I laughed and told her I'd be fine. I was 28, sober for 3 years, and proud of the fact that I was driving myself to a party where everyone else planned to get drunk. The party was at a friend of a friend's place outside a small town called Hartwick, a place that barely existed on the map. It was one of those old farmhouses that had been carved into apartments, with an unplowed gravel drive and a barn leaning back into the woods like it was trying to escape. I didn't know most of the people there, but that felt normal by then. New Year's Eve always gathered strangers, people trying to be someone else for one night. I parked next to a row of cars crusted with salt and went inside, where the heat hit me too hard and the music thumped through the floors. For a while it was fine. I drank ginger ale and watched people get loud. Someone spilled beer on my boots. Someone else cried in the kitchen over a text message. The TV counted down times in other cities because it was still too early here. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the feeling that always came on holidays, the sense that I should be somewhere else, doing something more meaningful. Around 10:30, I decided to leave. I had promised my mom I'd call before midnight, and the noise was starting to crawl under my skin. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean again. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked to my car. I remember thinking how quiet it was once the door shut, how the music dropped away and left nothing but the ticking of the engine and the distant bark of a dog. The gravel popped under my tires as I backed out, and then I was on the narrow 2-lane road that cut through the trees toward the highway. About 5 miles out, I saw headlights stopped ahead of me. At first, I thought it was someone turning, but as I got closer, I realized they were just sitting there, hazard lights blinking weakly. I slowed and pulled over behind them. The car was an older sedan, gray, with rust blooming along the wheel wells. The driver's door was open and no one was inside. I sat there for a second, debating. I had my phone. There was signal, though it flickered. I could call for help and keep going, but it was cold, and the idea of someone stranded on New Year's Eve tugged at me. I put the car in park, turned on my hazards, and got out. The road was empty in both directions, the snow along the shoulders marked with tire tracks that had already started to fill in. I called out, my voice sounding thin in the trees. "Hello? You okay?" No answer. I walked closer, peered into the car. The keys were still in the ignition, the engine dead. The radio was on low, some country song about missing someone. On the passenger seat was a purse, small and black, and a manila envelope stuffed with papers. It felt wrong to touch anything, so I stepped back and looked up and down the road again. That's when I heard it, a rustle from the woods on the right side. I turned, my heart jumping in a way that made me feel stupid for being scared. Probably a deer. "Hey," I called again, louder. "Your car's out here." A woman stepped out from between the trees. She was bundled in a thick coat, a knit hat pulled low, and she moved carefully, like she was trying not to slip. She looked to be in her 40s, maybe older, her face lined in a way that spoke of long winters. Relief washed over me so fast I laughed. "Your car won't start?" I asked, walking toward her. She nodded, eyes flicking past me to the road. "Battery died," she said. Her voice was flat, not upset. I went to see if there was a house nearby. "There's nothing for a while," I said. "I can call someone, or I've got jumper cables." She hesitated, then nodded again. "That would be nice." We walked back to the cars. I popped my trunk, dug out the cables, and attached them the way my father had taught me. The cold bit through my coat as I worked, and I could feel the woman watching me. When I finished, I told her to try starting it. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. The radio jumped louder, and she reached to turn it down. "Thank you," she said. She smiled then, and something about it made my stomach tighten. It didn't reach her eyes. "No problem," I said. "You should probably drive a bit to charge it." She nodded. "I will. Are you heading toward the highway?" "Yeah." "Would you mind if I followed you? Just until I'm sure it's okay." I hesitated. There was no real reason to say no. "Sure," I said. "Just don't ride my bumper." She smiled again. I went back to my car, my fingers stiff, and pulled onto the road. In the mirror, I saw her headlights fall in behind me. For the first mile, everything was normal. The road curved through the trees, the snow reflecting the beams. Then I noticed she was closer than I'd expected, her headlights filling my mirrors. I sped up a little. She matched me. I slowed. She stayed close. My heart started to pound. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she just didn't know how to judge distance on icy roads. Still, when I reached a long, straight stretch, I accelerated more sharply. She stayed with me, so close I couldn't see her headlights anymore, just the glow. I glanced at my phone on the seat, debating calling someone. That's when her high beams flashed, once, twice. I slowed, confused, and she swerved, pulling alongside me. For a second, our cars were side by side, tires hissing on snow. I saw her face clearly then, lit by the dash. The smile was gone. Her mouth was open, and she was yelling something I couldn't hear. Fear took over. I hit the gas, my tires spinning before catching. She fell back, then surged forward again, ramming my rear bumper. The impact jolted me forward, my seatbelt biting into my shoulder. I screamed, my hands shaking on the wheel. The road narrowed ahead, a bridge over a frozen creek. I had driven it 100 times. There was no shoulder, just a low metal guardrail and a drop. I knew if she hit me again there, I'd lose control. I swerved as she came up behind me, letting her clip my bumper instead of hitting me square. Her car fishtailed, and for a moment I thought she'd spin out. Instead, she corrected, slammed into me again, harder this time. The guardrail loomed. I yanked the wheel, felt the car slide, and then there was a tearing sound as metal scraped metal. The world went white and loud. When the car stopped, it was half on the bridge, half angled into the rail. Steam hissed from under the hood. My ears rang. I sat there, stunned, then forced myself to move. My door was jammed, so I crawled out the passenger side, my hands slipping on the icy frame. Her car was stopped behind me, nose crumpled, airbags deployed. For a second, I thought she might be dead. Then her door opened. She got out slowly, like she was savoring it. In her hand was something dark and heavy. A hammer, I realized, the kind you'd keep in a trunk for emergencies. She walked toward me, her boots crunching. "Please," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know what you want." She didn't answer. Up close, her face looked wrong, not just angry, but hollow, like something had burned out behind her eyes. She raised the hammer. I ran. I slipped once, caught myself on the rail, and ran again, back toward the road, waving my arms, screaming. Headlights appeared in the distance, then another set. I heard her footsteps behind me, fast, determined. The first car slowed, then stopped. A man got out, shouting. The woman froze, then turned and ran back to her car. She slammed the door, started the engine with a grinding scream, and spun around, tires throwing snow. She sped past us, nearly clipping the other car, and disappeared into the dark. The police came. An ambulance came. I sat in the back of a cruiser, wrapped in a blanket, shaking so hard my teeth clacked. I told them everything, over and over. They found the purse in her car, still sitting there, untouched. Inside was no ID, just the manila envelope full of newspaper clippings. Women who had gone missing on New Year's Eve over the past 10 years, all from towns within an hour of each other. Some were found later, some weren't. They never caught her. The car was stolen, the plates fake. The papers suggested a pattern, but without a name, it stayed a theory. Every New Year's Eve since, I stay home. I watch the countdown on TV and call my mother early. When midnight comes, I lock my doors and sit quietly, listening to the distant sound of fireworks and wondering how many people are on the road, trusting a stranger because it feels like the right thing to do. Story the end. I used to think nothing truly bad could happen on New Year's Eve. It felt like a night protected by noise and lights, by the idea that everyone was awake and watching the clock together. What happened to me changed that belief completely. I'm writing this because the police reports and the news articles never quite captured how it felt to live through it, minute by minute, waiting for midnight while something terrible was already unfolding. It was December 31st, 2016, in a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's last name and most of the houses were built before World War II. I was 28 at the time, newly divorced, and trying to distract myself by saying yes to every invitation I got. My friend Laura invited me to a New Year's Eve party at her cousin's farmhouse about 20 minutes outside town. She promised it would be relaxed, just friends of friends, some drinks, a bonfire, and watching the ball drop on someone's phone since there was no cable out there. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by woods on 3 sides and an empty field on the 4th. It had once belonged to Laura's grandparents, but after they passed, the place had been rented out to different people over the years. At that point, her cousin Mark was living there alone. I remember noticing how dark it was when we arrived. There were no streetlights, just headlights cutting through the trees, and the house itself was a squat, shadowy shape until we pulled into the yard and saw light spilling from the windows. Inside, it was warm and loud. About a dozen people were already there, music playing from a speaker on the kitchen counter, laughter echoing down the narrow hallway. Someone handed me a beer almost immediately. I recognized a few faces from town, but most people were strangers. That didn't bother me. I was in a social mood, and everyone seemed friendly enough. As the night went on, the house filled up. By 10 o'clock, there were probably 25 people there. Some had moved outside to stand around the bonfire, their faces orange in the flames, their breath visible in the cold air. Others crowded the living room, sitting on mismatched couches and folding chairs, talking over each other. I remember feeling a little claustrophobic and stepping into the kitchen to get some air. That was when I noticed the back door was unlocked and slightly open. It struck me as odd because it was freezing outside, and everyone I'd seen going in and out had used the front door near the bonfire. I mentioned it to Mark when I saw him. He shrugged and said it must have been left open earlier and that he'd take care of it. He didn't seem concerned, and neither was I, at least not then. Around 11, Laura pulled me aside and asked if I could help her look for her phone. She thought she'd left it in one of the bedrooms upstairs. The farmhouse had 2 small bedrooms on the second floor, connected by a narrow hallway with a low ceiling. The stairs creaked loudly as we went up, and the music faded to a dull thump below us. We checked the first bedroom, which was mostly empty except for a mattress on the floor and a dresser stacked with old clothes. No phone. In the second bedroom, I noticed the window was open a crack, letting in a thin ribbon of icy air. Laura laughed and said Mark was terrible about remembering to close windows. She found her phone under a pile of coats on the bed, and we headed back downstairs. That should have been the end of it. Just a strange detail in a long night of drinking and noise. But a few minutes later, someone screamed. It came from outside, sharp and sudden, cutting through the music. The room fell silent for half a second before everyone rushed toward the front door. I followed, my heart pounding, unsure what I was expecting to see. One of the girls from the party, a woman named Erin, was standing near the edge of the yard, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. She was crying, repeating over and over that someone had grabbed her arm. She said she'd been walking toward her car to get cigarettes when she felt fingers close around her wrist and pull her backward. She screamed, and whoever it was let go and disappeared into the trees. At first, people tried to laugh it off. Someone joked that it was probably just a drunk guy messing around. But Erin was genuinely shaken, her wrist already turning red. Mark grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the woods, was calling out and telling whoever was there to show themselves. No one answered. A few people wanted to call the police, but Mark hesitated. He said it would be embarrassing if it turned out to be nothing, and besides, it was New Year's Eve. The cops would be busy. Eventually, it was decided that everyone should just stay inside for a while. The bonfire was left to burn down on its own. We crowded back into the house. The mood noticeably changed. The music stayed off. Conversations were quieter, more tense. People kept glancing toward the windows. I found myself standing near Laura, trying to reassure her, even though my own nerves were frayed. At 11:45, the power went out. It wasn't dramatic at first. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the house into darkness. A few people groaned, assuming it was just an overloaded circuit. Someone laughed nervously and turned on the flashlight app on their phone. Others followed suit, small white beams cutting through the dark. Mark went to check the breaker box in the basement. He took one of the flashlights with him. We waited, counting down the minutes to midnight in our heads. The cold crept in quickly, without the heat running, and I hugged my jacket closer around myself. Minutes passed. Mark didn't come back. Laura called his name down the basement stairs, her voice echoing. No answer. A sense of unease spread through the group, thick and heavy. Finally, 2 guys volunteered to go down and look for him. They disappeared into the darkness, their flashlight beams bobbing on the walls. What felt like an eternity later, they came running back up, pale and shaken. They said Mark wasn't in the basement. The breaker box had been ripped open, wires hanging loose. One of them was convinced he'd seen footprints in the dirt floor that didn't match anyone's shoes from the party. Someone dialed 911 then. There was no more debate. As we waited for the dispatcher to answer, another scream erupted, this time from upstairs. I ran toward the stairs before I could stop myself. Several others followed. In the hallway at the top, we found one of the guests, a guy named Tom, pressed against the wall, pointing at the open bedroom door. Inside, the mattress was overturned. Clothes scattered everywhere. The window was wide open now. the curtain flapping in the wind. Tom kept saying he'd gone up to use the bathroom and heard movement in the room, like someone shifting their weight. When he turned on his phone's flashlight, he saw a figure crouched near the bed, watching him. It stood up and jumped out the window before he could react. By then, the dispatcher was still asking questions, her voice tinny and distant through the phone. She told us officers were on the way, but it would take time. The roads were icy, and they were handling multiple calls. We barricaded ourselves in the living room, pushing furniture against the doors, turning every phone flashlight toward the windows. The clock on someone's phone ticked closer to midnight. Outside, the woods were silent, too silent, like they were listening. At 11:59, we heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps, stopping right outside the front door. Someone tried the handle. It rattled, testing the barricade. A voice spoke then, calm and almost amused, wishing us a happy new year. I will never forget that voice. It sounded normal, friendly even, which somehow made it worse. The clock hit midnight. Fireworks exploded faintly in the distance from town, tiny pops and cracks carried on the cold air. Inside the house, no one moved or spoke. The handle rattled again, harder this time. Something struck the door, a heavy thud that made the whole frame shudder. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We waited, barely breathing, until we heard sirens growing louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, washing the room in color. The footsteps retreated into the darkness. The police searched the property for hours. They found Mark in the woods behind the house, alive but badly injured, tied to a tree with electrical wire from the breaker box. He couldn't remember much, only that someone had lured him outside earlier in the night and claiming there was a problem near the barn. They never found the person who did it. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread. Some people said it was a drifter, others insisted it was someone from town with a grudge against Mark's family. Erin couldn't sleep for months without seeing those fingers closing around her wrist. Tom moved out of state. Mark sold the farmhouse as soon as he recovered. As for me, I stopped celebrating New Year's Eve altogether. Every year, when the clock gets close to midnight, I remember standing in that dark living room, listening to someone wish us a happy new year from the other side of the door, and I wonder where he is now and who he's watching as the countdown begins again. Story, the end. I have never told this story out loud because every time I try, people either laugh or look at me like I'm fishing for attention. I don't blame them. If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't believe it either. But it happened. And it happened on New Year's Eve, the night everyone is supposed to feel hopeful, drunk, loud, and alive. This was December 31st, 2013. I was 26, living in a small rental house outside of Dayton, Ohio. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where fireworks echoed off empty streets and police cruisers rolled by just to keep bored teenagers from doing something stupid. My girlfriend at the time, Emily, had gone to Chicago to visit her sister for the holidays. I'd planned to join her, but work kept me behind. I decided I'd stay in, order food, and watch the ball drop alone. Around 9:30 p.m., I walked to the gas station 2 blocks away to grab beer and a frozen pizza. The air was bitter, the kind of cold that made your lungs sting. Fireworks were already popping somewhere in the distance, sharp cracks followed by laughter. I remember thinking how strange it was that everything felt normal, too normal. When I got out of something off about my house, the porch light was on. I always turned it off when I left, always. I stood on the sidewalk for a good minute, staring at it, trying to convince myself I'd just forgotten. I hadn't. I unlocked the door slowly, heart pounding harder than it should have. Inside, everything looked fine. No drawers pulled out, no broken windows, no sounds except the hum of the refrigerator. I checked the bedroom, bathroom, and spare room. Nothing. I locked the door, turned off the porch light, and tried to laugh it off. By 10:15, I had a beer in my hand and the TV on. That's when I heard a knock. It wasn't loud, just 3 slow taps. Not the kind of knock you give when you're excited to see someone. More like you're testing if anyone's home. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I muted the TV and waited. The knock came again. Same rhythm. I didn't answer. I stepped toward the window and peeked through the blinds. There was a man standing on my porch. He looked average in every possible way. Maybe late 40s, dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low, hands in his pockets. He wasn't shivering or shifting his weight like people usually do in the cold. He just stood there, staring at my door. After about 30 seconds, he knocked again, this time harder. "Yeah?" I called, my voice cracking. "Happy New Year," he said. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I'm looking for the Thompsons," he said. "They live here." "No, they don't," I replied. "Wrong house." He didn't respond right away. He leaned forward slightly like he was listening. Then he smiled. I could see it even through the glass. "That's funny," he said. "They always answer." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. "They don't live here," I repeated. "You should leave." He nodded slowly. "All right, enjoy your night." I watched him walk down the porch steps and disappear into the darkness. I stood there for a long time after, listening for footsteps, a car, anything. Nothing. I locked every door and window and tried to settle down. Midnight came closer. Fireworks grew louder. People screamed and cheered outside. I started to feel stupid for being scared. At exactly 11:58 p.m., my power went out. The TV shut off. The lights died. The house fell into darkness, so sudden it felt physical, like a weight pressing down on me. I grabbed my phone. No signal. No bars. I tried calling Emily. Nothing. Then I heard the knock again. This time it was violent. The door rattled in its frame. "Open up," the man shouted. I backed away, heart racing. "Go away," I yelled. "It's almost midnight," he said, his voice muffled through the door. "You don't want to be alone when the year changes." I grabbed a kitchen knife. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The knocking stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then I heard something else. Scratching. It was coming from the side of the house, near the bedroom window. Slow, deliberate scraping against glass. I moved quietly down the hallway and peeked into the bedroom. His face was inches from the window. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He smiled when he saw me. 10 seconds, he whispered through the glass. I stumbled backward and ran into the living room. The front door exploded inward with a crack of wood. He stepped inside like he owned the place, smiling wider than before. 5, he said. I raised the knife, screaming at him to stop. He didn't rush me. He didn't even seem interested in the weapon. 3. Fireworks boomed outside. People shouted the countdown. My heart felt like it was tearing itself apart. 2, he tilted his head. 1. The world outside erupted in cheers. At that exact moment, every light in the house flicked back on. The man vanished. Not ran, not hid. Vanished. I stood there screaming until my throat burned. Neighbors called the police because of the noise. They found the broken door, the scratched window, but no sign of him. No footprints, no fingerprints, no explanation. The officer asked if I'd been drinking. I said yes. He nodded like that explained everything. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's house. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I went back to grab clothes. That's when I found the note. It was taped to the inside of my front door, facing inward. "Thank you for letting me in before the year ended." I moved out that week. Emily broke up with me not long after. She said I wasn't the same. She was right. Years later, I learned something I wish I hadn't. The Thompsons had lived in that house before me, a family of 3. On New Year's Eve, 1998, they were found murdered inside right after midnight. The case was never solved. Sometimes on New Year's Eve, when the countdown starts, my lights flicker, and every year I swear I hear knocking. Story the end. I used to think New Year's Eve was harmless. Just noise, cheap champagne, fireworks echoing between buildings. I believed that until December 31st, 2013, the night my sister disappeared and the city kept celebrating as if nothing had happened. I'm writing this now because people still ask why I don't go out on New Year's Eve. I tell them I don't like crowds. That's easier than explaining how the sound of countdowns makes my hands shake, or how I still hear my sister's voicemail every time someone yells, "Happy New Year." That year, New Year's Eve fell on a Tuesday. Cold, but not brutally so. Chicago had been spared the worst of winter, which meant people were eager to be outside. Bars were packed, streets busy, the L trains running late and loud. My sister Megan was 26, newly single, and determined not to waste another year. Those were her words. She called me that afternoon while I was still at work, already half excited, half nervous. "Promise you'll answer if I call," she said. "I always answer," I told her. "That's not true. You didn't last time." I was in the shower. "Well, don't shower tonight," she said, laughing. I'm serious. I don't know. I just feel weird. Megan wasn't the type to get spooked easily. She worked as a paralegal downtown, rode the train at night, walked home alone. Hearing that hesitation in her voice made me pause. Then stay in, I said. Come over. We'll watch the ball drop. No, she replied too quickly. I already told everyone I'm going out. I just wanted you to, I don't know, be available. I promised. We hung up. I wish I'd pushed harder. She left her apartment around 8:30 p.m. in a black wool coat she'd just bought and boots she complained pinched her toes. Her plan was simple. Meet friends at a bar in Wicker Park, ring in the new year, crash at her friend Alyssa's place a few blocks away. She texted me a picture of her outfit in the mirror. I replied with a thumbs up and a dumb joke about frostbite. At 9:47 p.m., she texted again. Bar is insane. Might bounce. At 10:12 p.m., some guy won't leave us alone. I asked if she wanted me to come get her. She said no. He's just annoying. At 10:58 p.m., she sent me a voicemail. I didn't listen to it until later, but I remember seeing the notification and thinking I'd call her after midnight once the noise died down. That's the decision I replay every year. Midnight came and went. Fireworks cracked out my apartment windows. People screamed and hugged in the street. I texted Megan at 12:04 a.m., Happy New Year. No response. At 12:18 a.m., I tried calling, straight to voicemail. I told myself her phone was dead, or she was kissing someone, or she was asleep on a couch somewhere with music still blaring. I forced myself to wait until morning. At 7:42 a.m., Alyssa called me crying. Megan had never shown up. The next few hours blurred together. Police reports, phone calls, standing in Megan's apartment while officers looked through her things. Her purse was gone. Her ID, credit cards, everything. There were no signs of a struggle. No broken glass, no overturned furniture. It was as if she'd simply stepped out and vanished. The police told us what they always tell you. Adults can disappear voluntarily. New Year's Eve is chaotic. Give it time. But I had the voicemail. I listened to it in my car, parked outside the precinct because I couldn't bear to hear it with anyone else around. The message was only 27 seconds long. At first, it sounded like nothing. Loud music, voices shouting, laughter. Then Megan's voice, closer to the phone. Hey, it's me, she said. I know it's loud. I just wanted to... She stopped mid-sentence. The music faded slightly as if she'd moved away from the speakers. Please don't touch me, she said. Quieter now. There was a male voice then, close, calm. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone made my stomach drop. Megan laughed nervously. I'm serious. I'm calling my brother. A pause. Then her breathing changed, sharp, shallow. Okay, she said. Okay, I'm coming. The voicemail ended. The police listened to it twice. They asked me if Megan drank, if she used drugs, if she'd ever run away before. When I asked them about the man's voice, they told me it was impossible to identify anyone from that clip. The bar's security cameras didn't help. Too crowded, too many bodies moving at once. Megan could be seen leaving around 11:40 p.m., coat on, phone in her hand. She wasn't alone, but the footage was grainy. Faces blurred. The man beside her wore a dark jacket and a knit cap pulled low. Outside cameras caught them walking north for a block before disappearing into the flood of people. Weeks passed, then months. Megan's credit cards were never used. Her phone never pinged again. Flyers peeled off lampposts. People stopped calling. I tried to move on. I moved apartments, changed jobs. I told myself the city had swallowed her the way cities sometimes do. Then, the next New Year's Eve came. I was at home alone, lights off, TV muted. Around 11:50 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it, heart pounding, before answering. Hello? At first, all I heard was static. Then music. Distant. Familiar. A bar. Loud. People cheering. Megan? I whispered. Someone breathed into the phone. Slow. Deliberate. Then Megan's voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. Hey, she said, it's really loud. My knees buckled. I slid down against the wall. Where are you? I asked. Please, where are you? She laughed softly. Not the way she used to. This laugh was empty. I told you, she said. I feel weird. A man's voice cut in, clearer now, close to the receiver. She's fine, he said. She just doesn't know how to say goodbye. The line went dead. I called the police. They traced the call to a prepaid phone, purchased that morning at a gas station near the Indiana border. By the time they arrived, the station's cameras had already overwritten the footage. They told me it was probably a cruel prank, someone who knew about Megan's case, someone sick. I wanted to believe them, but every New Year's Eve since my phone rings. Sometimes it's a voicemail, sometimes it's a call that disconnects when I answer. Always the same sounds, music, cheers, countdowns. Once, 3 years after she disappeared, I stayed on the line long enough to hear something new. The crowd started counting down from 10, 9, 8. Megan was crying now, quietly. 7. Please, she whispered. I did what you said. 6. The man laughed. 5. Almost time, he said. 4. I screamed her name into the phone. 3. The sound of fireworks exploded in the background. 2. Her breathing became frantic. 1. Silence. Then the call ended. I don't answer anymore. I turn my phone off before midnight and sit in the dark, waiting for the noise to pass. I've moved states twice, changed my number more times than I can remember. It doesn't matter. Last year, the call came through my laptop instead, an unknown video request. I didn't answer, but the preview image loaded for half a second before disappearing. It was a crowded bar, balloons hanging from the ceiling, a banner that read Happy New Year. In the corner of the frame, partially turned away from the camera, was a woman in a black wool coat. Older now. Thinner. Her hair dull and uneven, like it had been cut with shaking hands. She slowly turned her head. Even through the blur, even through the years, I knew my sister's face. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Behind her, a man leaned into frame and placed his hand on her shoulder. The preview vanished. This year is coming up fast. The city is already stringing lights, advertising parties, promising fresh starts. I know better now. Somewhere, someone is still counting down, and my sister is still trapped in a moment that never ends. When midnight comes, I won't be celebrating. I'll be listening, waiting for the sound of a phone ringing, praying that one year when the countdown hits 0, the line will stay open. Story the end. I never believed in omens until New Year's Eve of 2013. The night I learned how quietly a year can end and how violently the next one can begin. I was 31, living in a rented ranch house outside Dayton, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where fireworks were illegal, but everyone set them off anyway, where police sirens were background noise, and the streets smelled like wet leaves and cold asphalt. My wife, Erin, had insisted we host something small, just friends, just food and drinks, nothing wild. I remember joking that nothing good ever happened after midnight on New Year's Eve, and she told me I was being dramatic. By 7 o'clock, the house was full. 12 people, mostly coworkers and a few old friends, coats piled on the bed in the spare room, boots by the door, condensation dripping off beer bottles onto the coffee table. Outside, the temperature was dropping fast. The weather app said it would snow after midnight. At 8:42 p.m., the power flickered. Just for a second. The lights dimmed, came back, and everyone laughed. Someone made a joke about the grid being as drunk as we were planning to get. At 9:15, my neighbor across the street, Mr. Halverson, knocked on the door. He was in his late 60s, retired, the kind of man who still wore a watch even though he never went anywhere. He didn't come to neighborhood parties. He barely waved. Seeing him standing there, hunched in his thick coat, felt wrong. He didn't smile. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I stepped onto the porch with him. Cold bit into my face. Somewhere far off, I heard what sounded like fireworks, but slower, louder, a deep boom followed by a rattling echo. "Fireworks," I said. He shook his head. "That's not fireworks." Before I could ask what he meant, another sound rolled through the night, a low, grinding noise like metal dragging across concrete. "It's coming from the woods," he said, pointing past the houses at the end of the street. Beyond them was a strip of trees separating the neighborhood from an old rail spur that hadn't been used in years. "Probably kids," I said, though I didn't believe it. He looked at me for a long moment. "Lock your doors tonight," he said. Then he turned and walked back across the street. Inside, Erin laughed when I told her. She kissed my cheek and handed me a drink. Midnight crept closer. Music got louder. People talked about resolutions they wouldn't keep. Someone started a countdown early, and everyone groaned. At 11:37, the power went out for good. The music cut mid-song. The lights died. Someone screamed, then laughed. Phones lit up the room with pale blue glow. Outside, fireworks popped, bright flashes through the windows. I went to the breaker box. Everything looked fine. No tripped switches. I checked my phone. No service. That's weird, someone said. The house felt colder immediately. Erin wrapped her arms around herself. Let's light some candles, she said. We found what we had. A few scented ones from the bathroom, some emergency candles from the kitchen drawer. The flames flickered too much, like there was a draft, but all the windows were closed. At 11:49, someone knocked on the door. The room went quiet. We weren't expecting anyone else. I told myself it was another neighbor, maybe asking if we had power. I opened the door. A woman stood there barefoot in the snow. She was young, early 20s maybe, wearing a thin dress that was torn at the hem. Her feet were red and bleeding. Her hair was tangled, her face streaked with dirt and something darker. "Please," she said. "They're coming." I pulled her inside without thinking. Erin grabbed a blanket. Someone asked if we should call 911. "My phone doesn't work," I said. No one else's did either. The woman kept shaking. "I was at a party," she said. "Out by the tracks. There were people there, and then it got quiet. Too quiet." "What happened?" Erin asked. The woman looked at the door like she expected it to burst open. "They came out of the woods." "Who?" someone asked. She swallowed. "I don't know." At 11:55, we heard screaming. It came from outside, from somewhere down the street. A single scream cut off abruptly, then another. People rushed to the windows. I tried to tell them to stay back, but they didn't listen. Through the glass, I saw figures moving between houses, not running, walking slowly, deliberately. They were tall, too tall. Their silhouettes stretched and bent in ways that didn't make sense when they passed under streetlights. Someone whispered, "What the hell is that?" A loud bang hit the side of the house. Something heavy. The candles flickered wildly, flames bending sideways. "Get away from the windows," I yelled. Another bang, closer to the door this time. The woman we'd let in started sobbing. They followed me. At 11:58, the knocking began. Not banging. Knocking. Slow. Polite. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. No one moved. My heart felt like it was going to punch through my ribs. "Open the door," a voice said from outside. It sounded almost normal. Male. Calm. "No," Erin whispered. The knocking continued. "You're having a party," the voice said. "It's rude not to let guests in on New Year's Eve." Someone dropped a glass. It shattered loudly on the floor. The voice sighed. "You're wasting time." Behind the knocking, I heard that grinding noise again. Metal on concrete. Closer now. At exactly midnight, every candle went out at once. The darkness was complete. No streetlights, no fireworks, no phone screens. Just black. Something slammed into the door with enough force to crack the frame. People screamed. Someone prayed. Erin grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. The door burst inward. I didn't see them clearly at first. Just shapes moving through the dark. Too many joints. Too many limbs. The smell hit me next, like wet earth and rust. The woman we'd let in ran toward the back of the house. One of the things moved faster than the others. I heard her scream once, then nothing. I swung blindly, hitting something solid. It made a sound like breaking wood. A hand, if it was a hand, closed around my throat. The grip was impossibly strong. I felt my feet leave the floor. Then there was light. Headlights flooded the living room. A car horn blared. The grip loosened. I fell, gasping. Gunshots cracked the air. The things screamed. A sound so high-pitched it felt like needles in my ears. They retreated, melting back into the dark. Police officers stormed in, guns raised. Flashlights cut through the room. The house was wrecked, furniture overturned, blood everywhere. Not all of it human. Out of 12 guests, 7 survived. The police reports blamed a home invasion, drugs, cult activity, animal attacks. No one could agree. The woods were searched. Nothing was found. The rail spur showed deep grooves in the concrete, like something heavy had been dragged across it. Mr. Halverson was found dead in his living room the next morning. His door had been knocked in from the outside. The power came back on at 12:17 a.m. We sold the house in March. Erin stopped sleeping through the night, like I stopped celebrating New Year's Eve. Every year since, just before midnight, my phone loses signal for a few seconds, just long enough for me to remember the knocking. 3 times. Pause. 3 more. Story the end. The streets of Cedar Falls were quiet that night, the way they always were when winter pressed its icy fingers into every corner of the small town. Snow fell in thin, powdery sheets, dusting the roads and sidewalks in a pale glow that reflected the sparse streetlights. Most of the town had retreated indoors, their windows glowing with the soft yellow of lamps and the occasional flicker of a television. But at the edge of town, where the older houses stood in close proximity, the Holloway residence was alive with noise. Music pulsed from the speakers and laughter spilled out into the cold night air. Emily Holloway adjusted the tinsel garland around the living room doorway and sighed. This year's New Year's Eve party was supposed to be fun, a way to forget the past year and usher in a new one. Her parents had been out of town, leaving her and her younger brother Jake responsible for hosting. Emily liked the idea at first, the freedom, the chance to show off their house to their friends. But as the guests arrived, the noise, the chaos, and the smell of cheap alcohol made her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite explain. Jake, oblivious to her mood, had already invited more people than Emily thought sensible. He was 19, and his friends ranged from a few familiar faces to strangers she barely recognized. She tried to shake it off and focus on setting up the drinks table, arranging the bottles of soda and punch with meticulous care. Somewhere in the background, someone shouted, and the music seemed to get louder, more distorted, almost suffocating. As the night wore on, the party became increasingly chaotic. People were spilling drinks on the floor, the sound of broken glass mingling with laughter, and the occasional shout. Emily noticed that one of Jake's friends, a tall guy with an unsettlingly calm demeanor, kept disappearing into the kitchen. At first, she thought he was just looking for snacks, but then she realized he had been gone for far too long. When she went to check, the kitchen was empty. The back door was slightly ajar, snow drifting inside. She closed it quickly, her unease growing. At around 11:30, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then came back, but the moment left a ripple of tension in the room. A few guests joked about the haunted Holloway house, referencing the rumors that had circulated for decades. Supposedly, the house was built over the remains of an old asylum that had burned down in the 1920s. Emily had never believed in ghosts, but tonight the stories gnawed at her mind. The first real sign that something was wrong came when she heard a scream from upstairs. It was sharp, panicked, and instantly cut through the noise of the party. Everyone froze, music stopping mid-beat. Emily's stomach dropped. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and ran up the stairs. Jake followed, looking confused but amused, assuming it was someone playing a prank. They reached the hallway, and Emily's light swept across the floor. Nothing seemed out of place until they approached the guest bedroom. The door was closed, but the doorknob rattled violently. Emily tried the handle. It wouldn't turn. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead as she pressed her ear to the door. There it was again, a soft, desperate whispering, almost like someone begging for help. She jerked back, heart racing, and called Jake's name. When he peered at the door, the whispers stopped abruptly, leaving only silence. Jake tried to open it again, this time managing to push the door slightly. Inside, the room was empty. The bed untouched, the dresser drawers closed. Emily's flashlight fell on a small patch of frost that hadn't been there before, glittering on the carpet like tiny shards of glass. A chill ran through her, unnatural and biting. She backed out of the room, urging Jake to follow, but he laughed it off, attributing it to the cold and the power flickering earlier. By midnight, the party had reached its peak. The living room was crowded, people clinking glasses, shouting, "Happy New Year." The countdown began. 10-1, and Emily forced a smile as the noise crescendoed around her. As the clock struck 12, fireworks outside lit up the night sky. For a brief moment, the world seemed normal again, the laughter returning with renewed vigor. But then she noticed the shadows. They weren't moving the way they should. Each candle, each lamp, cast dark forms that seemed too long, too twisted. They slithered along the walls, converging near the staircase. Emily froze, noticing the tall figure of the stranger she had seen in the kitchen earlier. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, perfectly still, his eyes dark and empty. And then, impossibly, he smiled. Panic surged through her. She grabbed Jake's arm, trying to pull him away, but he didn't see the man. The room around them seemed normal again, music blaring, people cheering, oblivious. Emily's heart pounded as she shook him. "Do you see him?" she hissed. Jake frowned, confused. "See who?" he said. When he finally looked, the figure was gone. The rest of the night spiraled into chaos. Guests began reporting strange sensations, cold hands brushing against them, whispers just behind their ears, objects moving on their own. Emily tried to keep everything under control, but fear had taken root in everyone. People started leaving, but the roads were slick with ice, and the snowstorm outside made it nearly impossible for anyone to drive safely. Trapped inside, panic spread like wildfire. At 2 in the morning, the party had dwindled to just a handful of people, Emily and Jake among them. They huddled in the living room, unsure whether to call the police. The lights flickered again, and the temperature dropped sharply. Emily shivered as the shadows in the corners of the room began to lengthen and writhe, taking forms she couldn't quite comprehend, faces twisted in agony, limbs bent in unnatural angles. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, then louder, a steady rhythm echoing from the walls themselves. Emily's hands shook as she reached for the front door. The moment she touched the handle, the knocking stopped. She turned, expecting to see a guest, but no one was there. The shadows moved closer, and a low, guttural sound filled the room. It was neither human nor animal, more a chorus of pain and anger that seemed to vibrate through the walls, the floor, the very air. Emily grabbed Jake, urging him toward the stairs. They ran upstairs, into the guest room where the whispering had first started. The door slammed shut behind them, and the room grew colder, the frost spreading rapidly across the carpet and furniture. They huddled together, listening as the sounds outside grew louder, more insistent. Then the whispers returned, clearer this time, forming words. Leave. Before it's too late. Emily's mind raced. Who or what was speaking? The lights flickered violently, plunging them into darkness for a moment before returning with a strange greenish hue. The door handle rattled violently, as if something wanted in. She screamed, pounding on the door, but it held firm. Jake was trembling beside her, muttering about visions he couldn't explain, faces in the shadows, hands reaching from the walls. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Finally, the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains. The frost melted as the temperature slowly rose, and the shadows receded, leaving the room cold but quiet. The door eased open, as if nothing had been trapped behind it at all. Emily and Jake stepped into the hallway, dazed and exhausted. The house was empty now. The guests had left, some calling their parents, others fleeing into the snowstorm, not daring to look back. When they finally ventured downstairs, the living room was pristine. Not a single trace of the night's terror remained. The broken glasses, spilled drinks, the chaotic mess, all gone. It was as if the house had never been alive with a party at all. The only evidence left behind was a small patch of frost in the corner of the living room, the edges sparkling faintly, almost like a warning. The Holloway siblings never spoke of that night again, not to anyone, not even each other. But every New Year's Eve, Emily would feel a cold draft in the middle of her living room, hear faint whispers brushing against her ears, and see shadows that didn't belong. And she would remember the stranger, the eyes so empty, so dark, and the smile that promised that whatever had claimed that night would return, again and again, with each tick of the clock. Story, the end. The wind cut through the streets of Chicago like a knife that last New Year's Eve, rattling the windows of the old brick buildings lining Lincoln Avenue. The city was alive with celebration, fireworks lighting up the gray winter sky, but for Jamie and her friends, the night was supposed to be just another party, a chance to forget their dreary jobs, their broke bank accounts, and the quiet tension that had been growing between them over the past year. Jamie had been dragged out by her friend Lena, who was insistent that the downtown rooftop party was the only place to be tonight. Jamie wasn't thrilled, but she didn't want to be the one to say no. The elevator ride up to the 18th floor was cramped and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old carpet. When the doors opened, the sound of pounding bass hit them, shaking their chests. The rooftop was packed. People were drinking, laughing, and taking selfies with the skyline behind them. Jamie felt a sudden chill despite her heavy coat. The night air was crisp, but there was something about the way the shadows clung to the corners of the rooftop that made her stomach tighten. She shrugged it off. It's just the wind, she muttered to herself. Lena grabbed her arm and led her toward the bar. The alcohol flowed freely, and as midnight approached, Jamie's nerves started to loosen. She laughed at Lena's stories, danced to the music, and even forgot about the weird feeling in her stomach for a while. The countdown began, 10, 9, 8, and she found herself swept up in the excitement, joining the crowd as they shouted and hugged strangers. When the clock struck midnight, fireworks erupted across the river, illuminating the night sky. It wasn't until the crowd started dispersing that Jamie noticed something strange. Lena was gone. She scanned the mass of people, shouting her name, but all she got in response was the echo of her own voice. The music thumped faintly from the bar below, but the rooftop was noticeably emptier than it had been moments ago. Jamie felt a twinge of panic. "Lena?" she called again, walking toward the stairwell. That's when she saw him, a man standing at the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. His coat was long, dark, and flapped in the wind. He didn't move, didn't seem to notice her, but there was something in his posture that set her teeth on edge. Jamie shook her head. She probably just needed to find Lena and leave. The stairwell was narrow, dimly lit, and smelled of urine and mildew. Jamie's heels clicked against the concrete as she descended, heart thumping. On the 10th floor landing, she found a janitor cleaning a spill. "Have you seen a girl, blonde, about 5'6"? Jamie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The janitor shrugged without looking up. "This is a big building. Lots of people tonight. Try the lobby." Jamie nodded and kept going, but unease gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every floor she passed, shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. When she finally reached the lobby, it was nearly empty. The security desk was manned, but the guard was slumped over, asleep. Jamie's phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Lena. "Don't come looking. I'm okay." Her relief was short-lived. The text had no number, no name, just that message. Jamie's stomach sank. She typed back, "Where are you? This isn't funny." No response. A loud bang echoed from the staircase. Jamie froze, scanning the lobby. The doors to the stairwell creaked. She wanted to leave, but curiosity and perhaps a misplaced sense of responsibility pulled her forward. As she climbed the stairs, the air grew colder. Her breath fogged in front of her face. On the 7th floor landing, she noticed something smeared across the wall, red, glossy, almost fresh. Panic clawed at her throat. "Lena?" she whispered. No response. Just silence. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She considered turning back, but something compelled her to keep moving. She reached the 5th floor and saw the janitor from earlier leaning against the wall, but his face was pale, blank, and his eyes stared straight through her. Jamie stumbled back. The man didn't move. Then he was gone, just like that. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Lena. "Stop. Don't come down. You can't help me." Jamie's fingers shook as she typed back, "What's happening?" Before she could send it, the lights flickered. The stairwell plunged into darkness. Jamie's breath came in short, panicked bursts. She fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight. The beam caught something at the end of the hallway. A figure, hunched, moving slowly. She gasped and stumbled back. The figure vanished. She ran. By the time she reached the lobby, the front doors were locked. The security guard was nowhere in sight. Her phone had no signal. Jamie's panic surged. She tried the emergency exit, but it wouldn't budge. Then she heard it, a faint whispering, coming from behind the elevators. She leaned toward the sound, straining to hear. "Jamie?" Her heart froze. The voice was Lena's, but broken, distant, and hollow. Jamie ran toward it, bursting past the elevators. The lobby seemed larger than it should have been, the shadows stretching impossibly far. And then she saw her. Lena, standing in the center of the floor, completely still, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were wide, glassy. Her mouth moved, forming words Jamie couldn't hear. "Lena!" Jamie shouted, taking a step forward. The moment she did, the floor beneath her shifted. The lobby stretched, walls elongating, ceiling rising. Jamie stumbled, falling to her knees. Lena's form flickered like a bad signal on a TV. When Jamie looked up again, Lena was gone, replaced by a figure in black, the same coat she'd seen on the rooftop man. Its face was obscured by shadows. Jamie scrambled to her feet, running toward the exit doors. The figure followed, gliding rather than walking, silent. She yanked at the doors. They wouldn't open. Behind her, the whispering grew louder, dozens of voices overlapping, chanting, calling her name. Desperate, Jamie ran to the elevator bank and slammed the buttons. Nothing. The lights flickered again, and for a moment she saw the reflection of the figure in the metal doors. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, a black void inside. Then, as if sensing her attention, it vanished. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Time seemed meaningless. When the lights finally stabilized, the lobby was empty. The doors opened. Jamie stumbled outside into the cold night. The streets were silent. No cars, no fireworks, no people, just snow falling softly over the city. She ran. Every street felt familiar, yet wrong. Every corner turned led her nowhere. It was as if the city itself had shifted around her. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, but not from Lena. "You should have stayed on the roof." Jamie didn't stop running. The wind whipped against her face, carrying a faint whispering that seemed to come from the buildings themselves. The skyline loomed, tall and unfamiliar. Finally, she collapsed against a lamppost, exhausted, shaking. Her breath fogged in the air, mingling with something else, something foul, metallic. When she finally dared to look up, she saw him, the man in black standing across the street. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched her. And behind him, in every window of every building along Lincoln Avenue, dozens of Lena-like figures stared back at her, mouths moving silently, eyes wide and empty. Jamie screamed, but no sound came out. The wind carried only whispers, growing louder, surrounding her, pressing into her ears and skull. She could feel them crawling under her skin, cold fingers brushing her neck, pulling at her hair, tugging her into the shadows. She turned to run, but the streets twisted impossibly, leading her back to the same spot every time. Somewhere in the distance, the fireworks started again. Silent, frozen, their reflections stretching across the snow like jagged teeth. Jamie's knees hit the ground, her hands clutching her head. She couldn't move. She couldn't escape. She was trapped, alone, with the whispers, with the figures, with the man in black who had been waiting for her since the rooftop. And then the crowd returned, not real people, just shadows of them. Faces blurred, expressions frozen in celebration, frozen in terror. Jamie realized with a sickening clarity that she wasn't in the city anymore. She had never left. The city had swallowed her, stitched her into its nightmare as part of the celebration, part of the eternal countdown that would never end. Her last thought before everything went black was Lena's voice, whispering from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Happy New Year, Jamie." Story the end. The night of December 31st had always been something of a quiet affair in Cedarville, a small town tucked away in the hills of New England. Most years, the streets were filled with the occasional firework, the faint sound of laughter from the local bars, and the occasional honk of a car horn as someone drove home after a night out. But that year, the town felt different, though no one could quite put a finger on why. It wasn't the chill in the air. December nights were always cold, but an underlying stillness seemed to have settled over the town like a warning. It started with the Johnson family. They lived on the outskirts, near the edge of the dense woods that bordered the town. The father, Mike Johnson, had just returned from a late shift at the mill, exhausted but looking forward to ringing in the new year with his wife, Laura, and their two teenage children, Sam and Emily. The house smelled faintly of Laura's famous cinnamon cookies, and the soft glow of Christmas lights still twinkled around the living room. Everything seemed normal until Sam mentioned something odd on the drive home. "I saw someone, or something, walking along the edge of the woods," he said, shivering despite the warmth of the car. "It wasn't a person. I think it was crouched, like it was stalking something." Mike chuckled, brushing it off. "Probably just a deer, buddy. Or some drunk kid from town." Emily, younger and more sensitive to the oddities of the world, didn't speak, but she kept glancing toward the woods as they pulled into the driveway. There was a heaviness to the air outside, a tension that felt almost alive. Even the trees seemed still, as if holding their breath. The night began normally enough. The Johnsons ate, laughed, and watched old New Year's specials on TV. By 10 o'clock, the town's usual celebration noises started faintly in the distance. Fireworks, cheers, the crackling of bonfires in someone's backyard. Mike decided to step outside for a moment to grab a final firewood log. He noticed, out of the corner of his eye, a figure standing at the tree line, completely still. For a moment he froze, convinced it was just a shadow. Then it moved. Not like a person walking, but more like something gliding over the snow, its limbs bent in unnatural angles. Mike rubbed his eyes and shook his head. By the time he looked back, it was gone. Dismissing it as a trick of the cold, he brought the firewood inside. At midnight, the family gathered in the living room, champagne glasses and sparkling cider in hand. They counted down, shouted, "Happy New Year," and hugged. The sound of fireworks outside was deafening for a moment, but then, strangely, all of it stopped. The town went silent in a way that made every nerve in Mike's body scream. Even the wind seemed to vanish. Emily was the first to notice the shadowy figure in the window. She pointed, but Mike, busy reassuring himself that it was nothing, didn't see it. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and went out entirely. The house was plunged into darkness. Laura lit some candles while Mike fumbled for the flashlight, trying to keep the children calm. "Mom, I hear something outside," Emily whispered. Mike strained his ears. There it was, a low, dragging sound, like heavy feet sliding across the snow, circling the house. It wasn't a person walking. The sound was uneven, jerky, like something with broken joints, or multiple legs moving in the wrong direction. The power flickered back on for a moment, and Mike's heart stopped. Standing just beyond the tree line, staring directly at the house, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, with glowing red eyes and limbs that bent at unnatural angles. It didn't move like a human, but it was watching, and then as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The family huddled together, too frightened to speak. Mike decided they should call the police, but the line was dead. No dial tone, cell phones had no signal, even the car wouldn't start. Panic began to seep into the room like cold water. That's when the scratching began. At first, it was subtle, coming from the roof. Then it moved to the windows, sharper and more urgent, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. Sam pressed his face against the glass, but there was nothing there, or at least nothing visible. Then, in the reflection of the candlelight, he saw them. Dozens of shadowy figures, crouched, moving slowly in the woods, all with the same glowing red eyes. "Dad, they're coming," Sam said, voice trembling. Mike tried to rationalize it, telling himself that fear played tricks on the eyes at night, that the shadows of the trees were just moving with the wind. But deep down, he knew. He knew they were not imagining it. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to stretch and twist in the darkness. Every attempt to leave the house was met with the eerie silence of the snow-covered woods, except for the occasional distant snap of a branch, the sound of something pacing just out of sight. Laura kept whispering prayers, clutching the children, while Mike kept a baseball bat in his hands, ready to defend his family against whatever was out there. Then came the knocking. Not normal knocking, but the kind that made the wooden walls vibrate. Slow, deliberate. Every knock sounded like it was testing the strength of the door, measuring it. Mike approached, shouting, "Who's there?" But no answer came. The knocking stopped. The family held their breath, listening. And then a voice, soft, almost a whisper coming from outside. "Come out!" It sounded like 1,000 voices speaking at once, layered over each other, impossible to pinpoint. The temperature in the room plummeted. Condensation formed on the inside of the windows as if the cold outside was reaching in, brushing against their skin. The Johnsons tried to stay together, but fear gnawed at them. Emily, unable to bear the tension, ran to the basement to hide. The basement door slammed shut behind her, and for a horrifying moment, Mike thought she had disappeared. Then came the screams. Not Emily's, but something else. Something shrill, inhuman, echoing up from the darkness below. Mike and Laura scrambled to the basement door. It was open now, the staircase empty. The screaming had stopped. Only the low dragging sound remained, circling the house. The lights flickered again, and in one brief moment, the entire front yard was visible through the living room window. The figures had multiplied 10, 20 more, standing just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. Mike grabbed the children, telling them to run to the neighbor's house, but the yard was a frozen, endless expanse, and as they stepped outside, the snow seemed to move, shifting unnaturally beneath their feet, slowing them down. Each step felt heavier, like the snow itself was resisting their escape. The figures moved closer, gliding over the surface without leaving footprints. And then the fireworks started again, not from the town, but from the forest itself. Bright, unnatural bursts of light that illuminated the creatures fully for the first time. Their bodies were skeletal, elongated, their limbs bent at impossible angles. They had no mouths, yet the whispering continued, louder now, chanting something that sounded like the wind speaking through teeth. The family ran blindly, tripping over roots and snow, trying to reach the neighbor's house. But when they arrived, the door was open, empty. No lights, No people. Just the smell of burning candles and something metallic, coppery in the air. The creatures had already been there. Panic turned into pure terror as they realized the town was empty. Houses were abandoned, streets silent except for the distant fireworks like flashes in the woods. The realization hit. They were alone, completely alone, in a town that no longer existed the way it should have. The world they knew had been replaced with something else, something waiting in the shadows. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time lost meaning. They hid in the neighbor's basement, rationing the small amount of food they found, listening to the scratching and whispering from outside. Occasionally, they would see the creatures through the cracks in the boarded windows, always watching, never moving closer, but always present, like a predator toying with its prey. By dawn, Mike noticed something even worse. Tracks in the snow. Not their own, but enormous, clawed footprints, moving toward the house, then circling it, then retreating, as if whatever was out there was deciding whether they were worth the effort. And the whispers didn't stop. They didn't fade. They didn't even pause. They simply waited. The family huddled together, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to move. And as the next New Year approached, the creatures didn't disappear. The whispers didn't cease. The town remained empty, frozen in a terrifying limbo. The Johnsons were left with one grim understanding. Whatever had arrived on that New Year's Eve had not come to celebrate. It had come to stay. And it had chosen Cedarville as its playground. No one in Cedarville was ever seen again. When search parties arrived weeks later, they found abandoned cars, open doors, and the occasional flicker of lights, but no people. Some claimed to hear whispers on the wind when they tried to investigate, and none of them ever returned after nightfall. The town was quietly removed from maps and official records, considered unsafely deserted, though the locals knew the truth. Whatever waited in the woods wasn't going anywhere. It had claimed the town, and anyone who stayed past New Year's Eve would join the silence. Story the end. The snow fell in thin, jagged flakes that New York City had grown accustomed to by late December. It was New Year's Eve, and the streets were alive with the chaotic energy of celebration. Cars honked impatiently as pedestrians rushed past, bundled in coats and scarves, their faces flushed with cold and anticipation. Among them was Claire Emerson, a 28-year-old nurse who had spent the past 12 hours at St. Joseph's Hospital, her shift running late due to a sudden winter flu outbreak. She had been looking forward to celebrating with her friends at a rooftop party in Brooklyn, but exhaustion weighed her down. Still, she dragged herself through the crowds, telling herself a little fun would be a deserved reprieve. Her phone buzzed constantly, texts and notifications from friends asking if she was almost there. She ignored them. What she needed most was fresh air, the quiet hum of the city streets, and the feeling of being outside her fluorescent hospital walls. By the time she reached the subway station, the crowd was thicker, the press of bodies warm against her cold fingers. She swiped her Metro card and descended the stairs, the echo of footsteps and distant laughter bouncing off the tiled walls. Something about the platform felt off, quieter than it should have been, with pockets of shadow between groups of travelers that seemed to stretch unnaturally. She shook it off. She was tired. Her imagination was just playing tricks. The train arrived with a screech, doors sliding open like yawning mouths. Claire stepped inside, finding it mostly empty, a rarity at this hour. She settled near the back, pulling her coat tighter around her and staring at the dimly lit seats across from her. The train jerked forward, and the hum of movement filled her ears. Then she noticed him, a man standing near the middle of the car, motionless, pale, with a thin, gaunt face that seemed older than the streetlights outside made it possible for him to be. His eyes were fixed on her, unblinking. He wasn't dressed like anyone else on the train. His coat was dark and threadbare, his shoes scuffed. The kind of person you might pass on the street and feel a strange chill run up your spine, even if only for a moment. Claire turned her gaze away, telling herself she was imagining it. Maybe he had just been staring at someone else before she entered. But when she looked back, he was closer, as if the train had shortened itself, the distance between them collapsing. She frowned and shifted her seat slightly, but he didn't move. His expression was blank, but there was a weight in his stare, something heavy, like he wasn't entirely there. The train stopped at the next station, a small one, barely lit. A handful of passengers got off, but he stayed. Claire's heart began to race. She reached for her phone, hoping to text her friends, but the screen went black. She tried again. Nothing. The train's lights flickered, dimming for a moment, and when they came back on, the man was right in front of her seat. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice firmer than she felt. He tilted his head slowly. "Do you want to get off?" Claire swallowed hard. Something about his voice, low and rasping, made her stomach turn. She nodded, though her throat felt dry. Yes, I need to get off." The train lurched into motion again before the doors opened. She stumbled toward the exit, only to find herself at the next stop, which looked wrong. The station wasn't one she recognized. The signs were yellowed and peeling, the fluorescent lights buzzing angrily overhead. No other passengers were there. The walls were damp, and a faint odor of decay clung to the air. Panic rose in her chest. She backed toward the stairs, intending to flee to the street, but the man appeared again at the top, silent and still, as if he had been waiting for her all along. Claire ran, ignoring the echo of her own footsteps. She reached the street and froze. The city looked familiar, yet wrong. The lights of Manhattan shimmered across the horizon, but there was no sound of traffic. No distant horns, no voices, just silence. Snow fell in heavier flakes, blotting out the edges of buildings and turning everything into a gray, endless blur. She tried her phone again. Dead. The battery icon flashed red, then died. She pressed the power button, but nothing. The cold seemed to press in on her, thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. And then she heard it, a soft, deliberate footstep behind her. Turning slowly, she saw him again. Same pale face, same empty eyes. But now there were others, shadows slipping from alleys and doorways, forming shapes that should not have been possible. Tall, thin, with limbs bending in unnatural angles, moving without sound. They were all staring at her. Claire ran. She didn't know how long she ran, her legs burning, snow crunching beneath her feet. When she finally slowed, gasping for air, she found herself in a small park, familiar somehow. A carousel sat in the center, its paint chipped and rusted, the horses frozen in mid-gallop. She could see her reflection in the carousel's glass, pale and shaking. Behind her, the shadows gathered, moving closer with each heartbeat. She ducked behind a tree, trying to catch her breath. The wind whistled through the branches, carrying a sound that was not quite words, but close enough to make her skin crawl. She could feel their eyes on her, even when she dared not look. Her instincts screamed to run, but every path out seemed to stretch further, the city morphing around her. Finally, she saw light ahead, a street lamp flickering weakly like a beacon. Relief surged, and she ran toward it, tripping and falling in the snow. She reached the lamp and looked up. The man was there, just beyond the circle of light, waiting. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, voice trembling. He tilted his head again. "It's midnight. It's your time now." Time. The word echoed in her head. She felt the cold press in deeper, like a vice around her chest. The shadows moved closer, silent and patient, their shapes bending impossibly as they flowed over the ground. Claire screamed and ran again, knowing somewhere deep down that the streets outside were no longer hers to navigate. The city twisted around her, every block stretching impossibly, doors and windows appearing where there should be none. Her friends' voices called to her faintly, but they were wrong, echoing as if from underwater. Desperate, she ran toward one of the voices, and the moment she reached the door of what she thought was a friend's apartment, the world shifted. The snow stopped. The city froze. The air was thick and still, pressing down. Claire's reflection in the window across from her was wrong. Her face had changed, her eyes hollowed, her skin gray. And then the whispers began, all around her, countless voices murmuring in a language she didn't understand. She tried to run again, but her legs wouldn't respond. The man appeared at her side, impossibly close, his hand brushing her shoulder. She screamed, and the shadows poured over her, cold and suffocating, carrying her into darkness. When the first New Year's fireworks cracked across the city sky, no one noticed the figure slipping silently among the crowd, her face pale and hollow, eyes empty. She was back in the streets she knew, but she wasn't herself anymore. Claire Emerson had become another whisper in the shadows, waiting for the next New Year's Eve to claim someone else. In the hospital, nurses would later remark that she never showed up for her shift. Friends called her apartment, but it was empty, the lights off, and the door locked from the inside. And every year, the city hears a soft, barely audible voice in the wind as the new year begins, whispering warnings to those who wander the streets alone at midnight. Story, the end. The city glittered that New Year's Eve like it always did. Lights twinkling off glass towers, fireworks ready to blaze in the sky, and thousands of people crowding the streets of downtown Chicago. But for Jenna and her friends, the night had started far from festive. The group of 6 had been driving from a suburban party when their old van, a battered Ford Econoline, sputtered to a halt on a quiet stretch of Lakeshore Drive. Snow was beginning to fall, dusting the asphalt and the frozen shoreline with a soft, deceptive white. Jenna banged on the dashboard in frustration. Come on, she muttered. The van had been acting up for weeks, but tonight it had finally chosen the worst possible moment to quit. Her friend Mike leaned back in the passenger seat, his eyes narrowing. You didn't top off the gas, did you? He asked. But it wasn't a question. They all knew he was right. Jenna groaned. I'll get it fixed next week, she said. Right now, we're stuck here until someone stops. The first car that passed didn't slow. The second didn't either. They were out in the open, a stretch of road bordered by frozen water on one side and an overgrown wooded embankment on the other. Their phones were dead, except for Mike's, which showed one solitary bar. He tried calling for a tow, but all he got was a dial tone, then a click. Great, he muttered. No signal. The group debated walking to the next gas station. It was about a mile down the road, but the temperature was dropping fast. Wind whipped off Lake Michigan, cutting through their jackets. Jenna argued against it, pointing out that in the darkness of that wooded area, they could easily get lost, or worse. That was when they first saw him. At first, it was just a figure in the distance, standing on the side of the road. They couldn't make out details, but something about the posture seemed off. Too rigid, too still. Do you guys see that? Whispered Claire, Jenna's roommate. Probably just some drunk guy, Mike said, though even he sounded uncertain. The figure didn't move. As the group squinted through the falling snow, they noticed it was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that seemed too long, hands hanging at strange angles. There was a mask of sorts on the face, pale and expressionless. The kind of face that, for a second, made Jenna's stomach drop. Maybe we should just stay in the van, she suggested. Yeah, let's not be dumb, said Alex, trying to lighten the tension, but even he avoided looking at the figure for too long. The figure began walking toward them, but in a way that made it seem like it glided, all the while never breaking its eerie, unnatural posture. Panic set in. Jenna tried to start the van again, stomping the gas pedal, but it refused. The headlights flickered, then went out entirely, leaving them in darkness. That's it, we're walking, Mike said, grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment. They piled out into the snow, each step crunching unnaturally loud in the night. The figure followed silently, never making a sound, always keeping a strange, perfect distance behind them. The first few minutes of walking were tense but uneventful. The wind whipped their hair and stung their faces, but nothing else approached. Then, the screaming started. Claire screamed first, pointing. Look! They all turned and saw another figure, or maybe the same one, they couldn't tell, from further down the road. Only it wasn't moving like the first one. It was slumped over, head at an unnatural angle, one arm dragging along the snow, leaving a smear of dark red. Oh my God, Jenna whispered. She could feel the panic clawing up her throat. We need to run. They sprinted, sliding on the icy road. The forest loomed closer, but so did the figures. Each one that appeared seemed more distorted than the last, limbs bent wrong, eyes reflecting in a glassy dead way under the sparse light of the street lamps. Then came the car. A beat-up black sedan came racing toward them from the opposite direction. The group jumped onto the roadside, nearly falling in the snow. The car skidded to a stop, and a man in his 50s jumped out, yelling, "Get in! Quick!" Without thinking, they all piled in. The man slammed the door and drove, tires squealing on the ice. He didn't look back, didn't answer any questions. Where are we going? Jenna finally managed to ask. Safe house, the man replied grimly. Hurry, they're faster than you think. They followed him through winding roads and desolate stretches of the lake shore. Every time they glanced in the rearview mirror, the figures were there. Hundreds of them now, lining the snowy roads, Their elongated limbs and twisted faces illuminated in the occasional flash of headlights. They didn't walk, they didn't run, they simply moved, like liquid shadows in perfect synchronization toward the car. Eventually, they reached an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The man opened a rusty side door and ushered them inside. Inside was dark, dank, and cold, but for the first time that night, they felt a shred of relief. What are they? Alex asked, voice trembling. The man shook his head. I don't know. Something wrong with New Year's Eve here. Always has been. People disappear every year. Most of them are lucky enough to never see it coming. But once you see them, well, you're part of it. The group huddled together as the man barricaded the door. Outside, the figures scratched and beat against the walls, their noises like nail metal, high-pitched wails, distorted voices crying out. Hours passed. The snow stopped. The city lights dimmed in the distance, and the clock ticked closer to midnight. The group sat in silence, watching as more and more shadows appeared outsizing against the warehouse, seemingly aware of their presence inside. At exactly midnight, a deafening scream echoed across the city. Fireworks exploded in the distance, a cruel irony against the backdrop of terror. In that moment, they realized the figures weren't just shadows, they were people. Former partygoers, passers-by, anyone who had been unfortunate enough to break down or wander alone on New Year's Eve. Their bodies had become grotesque parodies of themselves, limbs stretched, faces frozen in eternal expressions of horror. The man in the warehouse whispered, "Once they see you, they'll never stop. You can hide, you can barricade, but they'll come back every year. It's a cycle." A tapping came at the windows. One by one, faces pressed against the glass, staring at them with hollow eyes and twisted grins. Jenna felt bile rise in her throat. "Do we leave?" Claire whispered. The man shook his head. "Not tonight. Not until the sun comes up." They huddled in the corner, listening to the sounds of clawing, screaming, and unnatural footsteps outside. Time stretched, the wind howling around the broken structure as if the world itself had stopped. Outside, the figures moved with impossible coordination, circling, waiting, knowing that dawn was hours away. By sunrise, the tapping ceased. The figures disappeared, melting into the snow and ice, leaving the group in an eerie, oppressive silence. The man led them out, and the city appeared normal, lights flickering, people beginning to stir. It was as if nothing had happened. But Jenna knew better. She had seen the eyes, the limbs, the twisted faces. She knew that on the next New Year's Eve, somewhere else, someone else would break down on the side of the road and the cycle would continue. Even as they drove away, she kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those same hollow faces staring back at her, waiting for midnight. Story the end. It was a bitterly cold New Year's Eve in the small town of Millfield, Ohio. Snow had fallen earlier in the day, covering the streets in a slick, glimmering layer of ice, and the wind cut through the layers of jackets and scarves like a knife. Most of the town's residents were huddled inside, drinking and laughing, preparing to ring in the new year with friends and family. But not everyone was enjoying the night. For Daniel and his friends, it was going to be a night they would never forget, and not in the way anyone would want. Daniel had just turned 23, and like every year since college, he and his closest friends, Maya, Connor, and Jenna, had a tradition of venturing out on New Year's Eve to find the most isolated and extreme thrill they could manage. This year, the target was the old Whitaker estate on the outskirts of town. Rumor had it that the house had been abandoned for decades, ever since the Whitakers had disappeared on New Year's Eve in 1987. No one knew what exactly had happened, but locals whispered about strange noises, flickering lights, and a sense of being watched. "Are you seriously going to do this?" Maya asked as they climbed out of Connor's truck. She was bundled up in her heaviest coat, her breath fogging in the freezing air. "It's a haunted house story, not an amusement park ride." Daniel grinned, his cheeks red from the cold. "That's exactly why we're doing it. The scarier, the better. Besides, it's been abandoned for over 30 years. How haunted could it be?" Connor laughed. "Famous last words. Let's go before you change your mind." The four of them trudged through the snow, crunching along the narrow path that led to the Whitaker estate. The house loomed in the darkness ahead, black and skeletal against the gray sky. Its windows were shattered in places, and the siding was rotting away. The front gate, rusted and swinging loosely on its hinges, groaned as the wind pushed it. They made their way inside through a side door that Daniel had discovered was still slightly ajar. The interior was worse than they had imagined. Wallpaper peeled in strips, the floorboards were warped and cracked, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. "This place is disgusting," Jenna whispered, her flashlight cutting across the room. "Why do we even do this every year?" "Because it's fun," Daniel replied, trying to sound confident. "Now, let's split up and cover more ground. We'll meet back in the living room in 20 minutes. No funny business, okay?" They agreed, reluctantly. Daniel and Connor took the stairs to the second floor, while Maya and Jenna wandered down a long, shadowy hallway lined with closed doors. The house was eerily silent except for the occasional creak of the old wood beneath their feet. Maya's flashlight flickered as she shone it on one of the doors. She hesitated, a chill crawling up her spine before slowly turning the knob. The door swung open to reveal a small bedroom, frozen in time. A child's toys were scattered across the floor, and a thick layer of dust covered a small bed in the corner. On the wall, someone had scrawled in what looked like faded red paint. "Do not wake us." Jenna froze. "Maya." "Did you see that?" Maya nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah. Let's get out of here." They backed out of the room, but as they turned down the hallway, they heard it, a soft, low whisper, almost like someone was right behind them, breathing their names. Maya, Jenna. They spun around, but the hallway was empty. Panic rose in their chests as they broke into a run, only to find that the door they had entered through was now locked. No matter how hard they pulled, it wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, upstairs, Daniel and Connor were exploring the master bedroom. They found old photographs scattered across the floor. The Whitaker family, all smiling, except their eyes seemed wrong, empty, hollow. Connor shivered. "Man, this is creepy. Look at their eyes." Daniel was about to respond when he noticed something strange. The photographs were all dated December 31st, 1987, the day the family disappeared, and then he heard it. A slow, deliberate knock from the hallway. "Hello?" He called, his voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just another knock. This time louder, closer. Daniel's heart pounded as he and Connor slowly stepped into the hallway. The door at the far end, which had been closed, now hung ajar, swaying slightly. And then they saw it. A shadow moving inside, tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at impossible angles. Its head twisted unnaturally to watch them. Connor screamed. Daniel grabbed his friend, and they bolted down the stairs, only to find the front door wide open. The wind blew snow into the house, swirling around them like a storm. Down in the hallway where Maya and Jenna were trapped, the whispers grew louder, almost chanting. The floor beneath them shook slightly, and from the room where the ominous message had been written, a figure began to emerge, a small girl, her skin gray and her eyes black as coal, dragging her tiny hands along the floor, leaving a trail of blood. Screaming, Maya and Jenna slammed themselves against the door, trying to break it open. Just when it seemed like they couldn't get free, the door swung open by itself, as if the house itself had given them permission to escape. They didn't stop running until they reached the front yard, collapsing into the snow, gasping for air. Daniel and Connor caught up, but as they stared back at the house, they realized something horrifying. The Whitaker estate didn't look abandoned anymore. The windows glowed faintly with candlelight, and the front door was closed, pristine, as if nothing had ever happened inside. "What the hell?" Connor muttered, backing away. Maya and Jenna shook their heads frantically. "We saw something. There was a girl, and whispers." Daniel tried to rationalize it, but even he felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. Maybe it's best we just go. Let's get back to town." They stumbled through the snow, but when they reached Connor's truck, it wouldn't start. No matter what they did, the engine refused to turn over. Behind them, the Whitaker estate seemed closer than before, almost looming over them, its shadow stretching across the snow like a predator. And then the whispers started again, low, persistent, and impossibly close, coming from every direction at once. Daniel, Connor, Maya, Jenna. They turned, and in the pale light of the moon, they saw figures emerging from the darkness. Dozens of them, thin and pale, moving unnaturally fast. Some were children, some were adults, all with eyes black as night, mouths twisted in silent screams. The friends ran. They ran into the forest, stumbling over roots and ice, the whispers never stopping, the figures always just a few steps behind. The cold stung their skin, but they didn't care. All that mattered was survival. Hours, or maybe minutes. Time seemed meaningless in that nightmare. They finally stumbled onto the highway where a lone patrol car spotted them. They flagged it down, sobbing, shaking, pointing back toward the Whitaker estate. But when the officer looked, there was nothing. No house, no lights, nothing but a patch of empty forest and snow. They told their story, but no one believed them. The officer warned them about wandering near old properties at night, about letting imagination run wild. The friends tried to return to their normal lives, but the memory of that night lingered, haunting every New Year's Eve that followed. Daniel would never forget the whispers, and sometimes in the dead of night he swore he could hear them calling his name, soft but insistent, carrying the same promise as that night so long ago. Do not wake us. Years later, the Whitaker estate would appear in news reports as still abandoned, its windows broken, its structure decaying. But for Daniel, Maya, Connor, and Jenna, they knew the truth. The house didn't stay abandoned because no one wanted it. It stayed abandoned because it didn't want anyone. And if you listened closely on New Year's Eve, you could still hear the whispers echoing across the snow, calling for the living to join the dead inside. Every year, as the clock struck midnight, Daniel couldn't help but glance toward the outskirts of town, hoping he was wrong, praying the shadows wouldn't come for him again. But deep down, he knew. Some places in this world were never meant to be entered, and some nights were never meant to be survived. That New Year's Eve had changed them all. The laughter, the thrill, the courage, it had been replaced with fear. A fear that didn't fade. A fear that followed them into every corner of their lives, always reminding them of the night they had dared to wake something that should have stayed asleep. Story the end. I had never been a fan of New Year's Eve. The crowds, the noise, the drunk strangers, it never felt like something worth celebrating. But that year, 2018, I agreed to go to my friend Jason's party in a small town outside Indianapolis. He promised it would be low-key. A few friends, some drinks, and a view of the fireworks from his parents' property on the outskirts of town. I should have listened to my gut and stayed home. The drive out there was quiet, the roads slick with the residue of an early winter storm. Snow mixed with slush, making the headlights blur into the darkened fields. The closer I got to Jason's house, the more I noticed how isolated it was. His parents' property was huge, surrounded by woods on 3 sides, with an old rusted barn visible through the trees. By the time I arrived, the sun had set completely, leaving the house illuminated by a few dim porch lights. Inside, the party was small. Just Jason, his girlfriend Melissa, a couple of college friends, and me. Music played quietly in the background. The air smelled like pizza, beer, and pine from the Christmas tree Jason hadn't taken down yet. Everyone was chatting, laughing, joking, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't place. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it felt off, like being in a place that knew something I didn't. Around 9 o'clock, Jason suggested we go outside to see the stars. The backyard was massive, stretching out to the tree line. Snow crunched under our boots, and the cold air made my lungs burn. I noticed something strange as I looked toward the edge of the trees. Faint footprints in the snow leading from the tree line straight to the barn. They were too big for any of us, and there were no other tracks leading away. I mentioned it casually, thinking someone had wandered over from a neighbor's property, but Jason waved it off. Probably just deer or something, he said. But even as he spoke, I noticed the prints weren't like deer tracks. They were human-shaped, distinct toes and heels. They stopped abruptly at the barn. We went back inside to warm up. As the night progressed, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the old house groan. Melissa joked that the house sounded haunted, and we all laughed. But the laughter didn't reach my eyes. Something about the way the wind carried through the trees sounded like whispers. I told myself it was the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. By 11, the party had dwindled to just the 4 of us. Jason and Melissa went to get more drinks, leaving me in the living room. That's when I heard it. Soft tapping at the window. Not the front window, the one facing the woods. At first, I thought it was a branch, but the taps were too deliberate, too patterned. 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 long ones, pause, 1 short. My heart started racing. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I moved closer, shining my phone's flashlight toward the glass. The snow-covered yard was empty. I squinted toward the barn. There was a figure standing just inside the doorway, motionless. I froze, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the figure didn't disappear. It just stood there, tall, thin, arms hanging at its sides, staring at the house. I tried to tell myself it was Jason messing with me, but then I realized the figure was too still, too deliberate. And it wasn't Jason's build. Melissa and Jason came back, laughing. "You've been staring at the window for 5 minutes," Melissa said. "What's wrong?" "I thought I saw someone in the barn," I said, pointing toward the woods. Jason frowned. "No one's in the barn. You're seeing things. Let's just get ready for midnight." I didn't argue, but I stayed near the windows, my phone clutched in my hand. As midnight approached, we went out to the front yard to watch fireworks from the neighboring town. The snow crunched beneath our boots, and the cold air was sharp against our faces. The fireworks began, distant booms echoing through the trees. I tried to focus on the sky, the bursts of color, the celebrations, but my eyes kept flicking back to the tree line. That's when I saw it moving. The figure from the barn. Now it was closer, stepping slowly out of the trees toward the house. It moved like it was gliding, no sound, no snow crunching under its feet. My stomach dropped. I shook Jason. "Someone's coming," I said. He laughed nervously. "It's the fireworks. Relax. You're seeing shadows." But it wasn't shadows. The figure moved with precision, coming down the driveway. Even in the dim light, I could see it was unnaturally thin, its head tilted slightly like it was studying us. Melissa saw it too. She screamed, pointing. Jason finally followed my gaze. His face went pale. "Stay back!" he yelled. The figure didn't respond. It kept coming. As we backed toward the house, the front door burst open. None of us had touched it. I stumbled inside, tripping over the threshold. The figure was at the doorstep. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me. Jason grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and shouted, "Get back!" The figure didn't flinch. It simply raised one long, thin hand pointing at us, and then slowly reached toward the doorframe. That's when the lights came back on, bright and sudden, illuminating the living room. For a brief second, the figure seemed human, but distorted. Limbs slightly too long, posture wrong. Then it vanished. Not ran, not walked, just gone. We were all shaking, too terrified to speak. Melissa clung to Jason, and Mark, no, there was no Mark, just the 3 of us. I couldn't stop my eyes from darting to the tree line, expecting it to be back. We locked all the doors and windows and stayed in the living room, huddled together as the town's fireworks continued to echo in the distance. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every creak of the house felt like it was following us. The next morning, Jason suggested we go check the barn. I almost didn't want to, but curiosity and fear pushed me forward. Snow covered the yard, and as we approached the barn, I noticed something chilling. Footprints leading from the tree line around the barn and stopping at the back door of the house. The prints were enormous, far bigger than any of us, and they were pressed deep into the snow as if someone heavy had walked there. Inside the barn, there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of entry. Just the old tools, rusted metal, and dust. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered. I took a step back and noticed scratches along the inside doorframe of the barn. Long, deep gouges as if something had clawed at the wood. I never went back to that property again. Jason moved out a few months later, claiming he couldn't handle the weird stuff that happened at night. I stayed in my apartment, avoiding New Year's celebrations entirely. Every year, when December 31st approaches, I see shadows in the corners of my vision, fleeting glimpses that vanish when I turn my head. Sometimes, I swear I hear tapping at my windows. Pause, too long, pause, 1 short. I learned that some things aren't just coincidence. Some things are waiting and they choose their moment carefully. Midnight, New Year's Eve, the exact moment when the world celebrates beginnings, they watch, patient, knowing that fear is most potent when everyone else is laughing. I never saw the figure again in person, but I can't escape it, and every year I wonder if this will be the year it comes back, patient, gliding across the snow toward me, waiting to make the new year its own. Story the end. The last New Year's Eve I ever spent alone started quietly. almost too quietly. I had taken a temporary security job at the Seaview Estates, a gated residential community just outside Boston. Most of the residents had gone to parties or family gatherings, leaving the place unnervingly silent. My instructions were simple: monitor the gates, do routine patrols, and report anything unusual. Easy money for a night, or so I thought. By 10 p.m., the snow had begun to fall, fine and wet, coating the roads in a sheen of ice that made my boots slip every time I stepped outside. The security office was small, a single room with a desk, a bank of surveillance monitors, and a coffee machine that only worked half the time. I settled into the squeaky chair with a cup of bitter coffee and started cycling through the cameras. Everything seemed normal. Empty streets, a few cars parked in driveways, no sign of life. Occasionally, I'd see someone through a window laughing or talking, but most homes were dark. I tried to focus on the monotony, scrolling through the footage, but a gnawing sense of unease began to grow. There was something about the quiet, the way it pressed against the walls of the office, that made my stomach twist. At 11:15, the first unusual thing happened. On camera 3, overlooking the cul-de-sac near the community center, I noticed a figure walking down the road. Not unusual in itself, people sometimes walk their dogs late, but there was no dog. The figure moved slowly, arms hanging at its sides, head down. What unsettled me was the way it moved, stiffly, almost as if it were being pulled along by invisible strings. I zoomed in. No face was visible, just a hooded coat and dark shadows where its features should have been. The figure paused in the middle of the cul-de-sac, then turned abruptly, walking straight toward the camera. My pulse quickened. I called the dispatcher, trying to sound casual, but no one answered. I called again, then realized I had no signal on my phone. By 11:30, the snow had thickened. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the figure was gone from camera 3. I checked every other camera, but there was no sign of it. That's when the knocking started. At first, I thought it was the wind, rattling the front door. Then I realized the pattern was too deliberate, slow, measured. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I opened the office door cautiously, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the snow-covered street. Nothing, just the snow, falling silently. The cul-de-sac was empty, tire tracks from earlier patrols fading beneath the new snowfall. I stepped outside, the cold biting my cheeks, and scanned the perimeter. Nothing moved. I returned inside, trying to shake off the unease. Midnight was approaching. I switched the monitors back to the cul-de-sac, and that's when I saw it again. The figure was standing at the end of the road, perfectly still, facing me. My heart raced, my breath visible in short, panicked bursts. Then it raised its arms, slowly, deliberately, and pointed toward the office. I bolted to the front door, fumbling with the lock. My fingers were numb, my heart hammering. When I finally stepped outside, the figure was gone. The snow continued to fall, quiet, almost apologetically, like nothing had happened. I ran toward my car, parked near the gate, and tried to start it. The engine sputtered and died, over and over. The figure appeared again, closer this time, emerging from the shadows between 2 pine trees. I froze. It moved with an unnatural jerky gait, closer and closer, until I could see the hood fall back just slightly. I caught a glimpse of its face, pale, stretched, eyes hollow and black, mouth twisted in a silent scream. I ran. I didn't care about the car. I ran across the snow toward the street where another security post might have someone awake. My boots sank into the snow, my lungs burning. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps, though no one was there, growing louder, faster. I turned a corner and almost collided with a neighbor's sedan. The doors were locked, windows frosted over. The street beyond was empty. Then the air grew warmer, almost suffocating, and I felt a presence behind me. I glanced back, nothing. Just the long, dark shadows cast by the streetlights. I reached the main gate. The keypad blinked. I punched in the override code. It didn't work. Nothing worked. Panic set in fully, icy and relentless. I pounded on the gate, yelling for help. The snow began to swirl more violently, a sudden gust that made the streetlights flicker. Then the cameras went out. One by one, the monitors went black. The only sound was the wind, or was it a whispering? I swear I heard names, my name, whispered in a dry, sibilant tone. I ran to the office, slammed the door, and locked it. Midnight struck. Fireworks echoed faintly in the distance, but they sounded wrong, muffled, like underwater explosions. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, echoing inside the office. I covered my ears, crouched in the corner, shaking. Then came the pounding, first on the door, then on the walls, then from beneath the floorboards. I heard it speak this time, a voice not human, thick and wet. It's time. The lights flickered. The office heater died again. My flashlight went out. I was plunged into darkness, the whispering now all around me, names repeated over and over, faster and faster, some familiar, some not. Then the door creaked open. I forced myself to look. The figure was there, but different. No hood, no coat. Just a pale, elongated face with black eyes and the mouth opening impossibly wide. Its head tilted unnaturally, and it started to speak in that same dry, gurgling voice. "You see what they carry? You see how it waits?" I screamed, backing into the corner. The figure reached toward me, but the floor beneath me buckled, and I fell through a hole I hadn't seen, plunging into darkness. The cold hit me first, then the snow, then silence. When I woke, hours later, dawn breaking over the estate, the office was normal. My flashlight worked. The monitors blinked back to life. The snow had stopped. The streets were empty. The gate was functional. Nothing out of place except for my shoes caked in ice and mud I couldn't explain. I quit that job the next day. I never told anyone what happened. People laughed when I mentioned the freezing cold in the office or the weird power outages. They assumed fatigue or overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Every New Year's Eve since, I can't sleep. I can't be alone. I drive past snow-covered streets, dark neighborhoods, abandoned lots, and I swear I see the shadows at the edge of my vision. I hear whispers behind me, names being called softly, promises of time carried forward, debts unpaid. And I know that somewhere, in some quiet place, it waits for the next shift, the next soul alone on a cold night, waiting for the clock to strike midnight. I'll never take another job alone on New Year's Eve. I'll never walk streets after dark. I'll never forget what I saw at Seaview Estates, because some things aren't left behind when the year ends. Some things come with you into the new one, watching, waiting, always hungry. And I know that one day I won't be fast enough. Story the end. The last New Year's Eve I ever worked the night shift started like any other, with the radio host counting down the hours and callers arguing about whether resolutions were pointless or sacred. I was alone in the toll booth on Route 1 and 17, a forgotten stretch of highway that cut through pine woods and frozen marshland north of Albany. The state had automated most of the booths years ago, but this one remained because the bridge ahead iced over so often that someone needed to slow traffic and keep an eye out. I needed the overtime. My wife was 7 months pregnant, and the hospital bills were already stacking up like bad snowdrifts. Snow fell in a thin, steady curtain, not enough to stick yet, just enough to blur headlights and make everything feel hushed. The digital clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. I poured bad coffee into a chipped mug and tried not to think about the car accident from the year before. The one everyone still talked about when they drove this road. The one that happened right after midnight on New Year's Day. At 11:17 p.m., a silver sedan rolled up, windows fogged, driver tense. He paid in exact change, didn't look at me, and sped off too fast. I remember thinking people always drove like they were being chased on New Year's Eve, like they wanted to outrun the old year before it caught them. The radio crackled with static and then cleared. A dispatcher's voice asked if I was awake. I said yes. He laughed and said, "Almost there." Almost where, I wondered. Midnight or something else. At 11:42, the first odd thing happened. A pickup truck stopped short of the booth, 20 feet back, lights on, engine running. I leaned out and waved. The driver didn't move. I waited, thinking maybe he was fumbling for cash. After a minute, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. Snow squeaked under my boots. The truck idled loudly, exhaust curling. As I got closer, I saw the windshield was shattered inward like a spider web pushed by a fist. The driver's door was closed. I knocked on the window and called out. No response. I reached for the handle. The door swung open easily. The seat was empty. I stood there, snow melting on my collar, staring at a running vehicle with no one inside. I checked the back seat. Empty. The radio in the cab was on, blasting a countdown show, the host's voice distorted and tinny. I shut the engine off and looked up and down the road. No footprints led away from the truck. Just tire tracks and falling snow already softening their edges. I called it in. The dispatcher sounded distracted, told me to log it and get back inside. State police would swing by when they could. It's New Year's Eve, he said, as if that explained everything. Back in the booth, the heater hummed. I watched the road, half expecting someone to come running out of the trees. No one did. At 11:55, the line of cars slowed. A minivan with kids in the back, party hats bobbing. A couple arguing in a compact car, the woman crying quietly while the man stared ahead. A rideshare driver yawning, earbuds in, tapping his wheel to music I couldn't hear. Ordinary lives passing through my square of glass and concrete, all of them carrying something into the new year they didn't want to bring. At 11:59, the radio host began the countdown. 10, 9, 8. The booth felt too small. The snow seemed to fall harder, thicker, swallowing sound. 7, 6. I glanced at the digital clock. 5, 4. The lights flickered. 3, 2. Midnight hit and the radio erupted with cheers. Horns blared on the highway. Fireworks popped faintly somewhere far away. I smiled despite myself, thinking of my wife asleep at home, hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. Then the radio cut out. Not static. Silence. The lights went out too. The booth plunged into darkness, heater dead, clock blank. Outside, the road lights along the bridge winked off in a line like someone blowing out candles one by one. My phone had no signal. I stepped outside again, heart pounding, breath fogging thickly. The snow had stopped. The air was too still. That's when I saw the cars. They were lined up in both lanes, stretching back farther than I could see, engines off, headlights dark. I hadn't heard them stop. I hadn't heard doors open. They were just there, frozen in place like abandoned toys. I walked to the nearest car, a red hatchback. The driver sat behind the wheel, hands gripping it tightly, eyes wide open. He wasn't breathing. His skin had the dull gray look of old wax. The clock on his dashboard read 11:59. I stumbled back, nausea rising. I tried another car. Same thing, a family minivan, kids slumped in their seats, party hats askew. A couple mid-argument, mouths frozen in half-formed words. Every clock I saw read 11:59. A sound came from the woods, not footsteps, something like dragging, slow and heavy. I turned, heart hammering, and saw movement between the trees. A shape emerged, tall and wrong, like a man stretched too thin. It wore a coat that looked soaked and heavy, clinging to a frame that shouldn't have been able to stand. Its face was pale and slack, eyes dark pits that reflected nothing. It moved toward the line of cars, stopping at each one, peering inside. When it reached the red hatchback, it leaned in close to the driver's window. The glass fogged instantly. The thing straightened, turned its head, and looked right at me. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. The booth, the woods, anywhere but there. My boots slipped on ice, and I went down hard, pain flaring in my wrist. I scrambled up and made it to the booth, slamming the door and locking it as if a flimsy lock could stop something like that. I crouched on the floor, trying to breathe quietly. The thing's shadow passed over the booth window. Frost bloomed across the glass, crawling inward like veins. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed, something I hadn't done since my father died. A knock sounded on the door. Slow, deliberate. I didn't answer. The knock came again. Then a voice, low and wet, as if spoken through water. "It's time." I covered my ears. The voice continued, closer now, right outside the booth. "They never stop," it said. "The clocks, the roads, they carry so much with them." I thought of the accident from last year. The drunk driver who blew through the booth just after midnight, skidded on the bridge, and went over the side. The bodies they pulled from the frozen river days later. I had been working that night too. I had waved him through. I had watched his taillights disappear. The voice sighed. "Every year," it said, "someone forgets." The frost cracked. The door handle rattled. I screamed and threw myself at the door, bracing it with my weight. The cold seeped through my clothes, through my bones. The knocking stopped. For a long moment, there was only my ragged breathing. Then, somewhere far away, a horn honked. Another answered. Lights flickered on along the bridge, one by one. The heater coughed back to life. The digital clock blinked and reset to 12. The door was warm under my hands. I opened it. The road was normal again. Cars idled, engines humming, drivers impatient. The red hatchback rolled forward. The driver looked tired but alive, eyes focused, dashboard clock now reading 12:01. I stood there, shaking, as traffic resumed. No sign of the thing. No frost. No shadows in the woods. State police arrived at 12:23, responding to my earlier call about the abandoned truck. They found it where I'd left it. The windshield shattered, the radio off, no driver. They took my statement, exchanged looks that said they didn't believe me, and told me to get some rest when my shift ended. I drove home at dawn, hands still trembling on the wheel. My wife met me at the door, worried. I told her I was fine. I didn't tell her about the clocks, or the thing in the woods, or the way I felt like something had brushed past me, leaving a mark I couldn't see. In the weeks that followed, the news ran a small story about a man found frozen in the marsh near Route 117, his clothes soaked, his watch stopped at 11:59 p.m. on New Year's Eve. They said he'd wandered off the road, disoriented. Alcohol may have been involved. I quit the toll booth job, took a day shift somewhere else. We had our baby in March, a healthy boy with a strong cry. Life moved on, as it does. But every New Year's Eve, when the countdown starts and people cheer, I feel a chill. I think about the road, about the clocks, about the things people carry with them when they think time resets, when they believe the old year can be left behind like a bad memory on a dark highway. And I make sure I'm home before midnight. Story the end. The snow fell thick and heavy over the small town of Pine Ridge, blanketing the streets in silence and frost. It was New Year's Eve, and most of the town's residents were holed up in their homes, either attending parties or quietly watching the countdown on television. But for Karen and Luke, this year was going to be different. They had planned a quiet night at Luke's parents' cabin on the outskirts of town, nestled deep in the woods. It was a tradition they had started a few years back, enjoying the isolation, the stillness, and the way the snow muffled the world. The drive out to the cabin had been slow. Snowdrifts blocked parts of the road, and visibility was poor. The headlights of their SUV barely cut through the darkness, illuminating the skeletal outlines of pine trees dusted with snow. Luke insisted take the old logging road, a shortcut that wound through denser woods. Karen had protested, saying it was risky at night, but Luke waved her concerns away. "We'll be fine," he said, his voice barely audible over the whine of the wind. When they finally arrived at the cabin, it looked exactly as it had every year, small, wooden, and isolated, with smoke curling from the chimney. The door creaked as Luke pushed it open, and the warm smell of pine and wood smoke greeted them. They settled in quickly. They had lighting a fire in the old stone fireplace and opening a bottle of champagne. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake catching the glow of the cabin lights like tiny frozen sparks. Around 10 o'clock, Karen's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "You shouldn't be there." She laughed nervously, showing it to Luke. "Some kid playing a prank," he said. But Karen's unease lingered. The text had been unnerving in a way she couldn't shake. She put the phone down, trying to focus on the fire. By 11, the atmosphere in the cabin had changed. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the windows and making the trees groan. Karen thought she heard footsteps in the snow outside, but when she looked through the window, there was nothing, just the white, swirling void of the snowstorm. "Probably just a deer," Luke said, though his voice lacked conviction. As midnight approached, Karen and Luke decided to step outside for a moment, wanting to watch the first fireworks in town. They bundled up and stepped onto the porch, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The air was sharp and cold, biting at their faces, and the forest around them was eerily silent, except for the occasional snapping of a branch. That's when they saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. At first, they thought it was a person, maybe a hiker or someone stranded, but it didn't move like a human. Its movements were jerky, almost unnatural, and it didn't respond to their calls. Karen froze, gripping Luke's arm. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Luke squinted into the darkness. "Yeah, maybe it's someone lost." They watched as the figure slowly moved toward the cabin. Its pace was unsteady, as if it were limping, yet it didn't seem burdened by the snow. When it reached the clearing in front of the cabin, it stopped. The wind howled and the snowfall thickened, obscuring their view. Then, in a moment of clarity, Karen realized something impossible. It had no face, just a dark, smooth expanse where features should have been. Panic set in. They bolted back inside and locked the doors, pulling the curtains tightly. Luke tried to joke, but the tension was palpable. They tried to watch TV to distract themselves, but the signal was full of static, cutting in and out, sometimes forming shapes that made Karen's stomach twist. At 11:45, the lights flickered once, then went out completely. The cabin was plunged into darkness. The fire in the fireplace seemed to dim unnaturally, and the temperature dropped sharply, their breath visible in the icy air. A scratching sound began at the door, slow and deliberate, like claws dragging across the wood. Karen grabbed a kitchen knife, shaking, while Luke tried to stay calm. The scratching stopped abruptly. Then came the whispering, soft, low voices, indistinguishable at first, then clearer, calling their names, imitating them. Karen, Luke, Karen screamed, clutching Luke's arm. We have to get out of here! They tried the front door, locked. The windows, frosted over from the inside, though they hadn't been before. Something was outside, moving just beyond the glass. Shadows flickered across the snow. Then the whispers grew louder, almost pleading. Luke remembered the old logging road. The truck! We can make it to the truck and leave, he shouted. They bundled themselves in coats and boots and ran for the door, shoving it open into the storm. The snow was waist deep, the wind pushing against them like a physical force. Through the whiteout, they could barely see, but the figures were moving too. Tall, shadowy shapes emerging from the trees, surrounding them in silence. Karen tripped. Luke grabbed her, pulling her up, but the figures were closer now. Their forms were indistinct, but the eyes, they were glowing faint red in the snow. Their shapes twisted unnaturally, as if the snowstorm itself had become alive, feeding on the fear in Karen and Luke. They ran, blindly, crashing through the trees, the figures moving silently around them. The truck was just ahead, or it should have been. When they reached the clearing, there was nothing. The snow-covered vehicle had vanished. In its place, the shadows seemed to pulse, closing in. Karen screamed as a figure reached out, its hand impossibly long and thin, almost skeletal. Luke pushed her back, but the darkness swallowed them both. The whispers became a cacophony, echoing inside their heads, repeating every fear and insecurity they had ever had. Hours. Or was it minutes? Later, the police found the cabin empty. No footprints led away from it. The snow around the cabin was pristine, untouched, as if nothing had happened. Inside, the fireplace was cold, the curtains untouched, and the knife lay on the floor, clean and dry. Karen and Luke were gone. Some locals say if you drive past the cabin on a snowy New Year's Eve, you can see flickering lights in the windows, shadows moving behind the glass. Others claim that if you listen closely, you can hear whispers on the wind calling your name. No one dares go near the old logging road, and the snow always seems heavier there, as if the forest itself wants to keep its secrets buried. Year after year, families gather in town, watching the fireworks from their homes, unaware that the shadows in the woods are patient, waiting, remembering. And for those who live near Pine Ridge long enough, every New Year's Eve comes with a quiet fear, the fear that the forest might be reaching for someone new. Story the end. I never liked New Year's Eve, but I used to think that was just me being bitter. Everyone else loved the countdown, the noise, the promise that something would magically change at midnight. For me, it always felt forced. The year this happened, I was 34, living in a small rental house outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, working night shifts as a road maintenance inspector for the county. My job mostly involved checking stretches of highway after storms, making sure barriers were still intact, and responding when sensors flagged unusual activity. It was boring, lonely work, which suited me fine. That New Year's Eve, December 31st, the weather turned strange just after sunset. Snow was expected, but instead we got freezing rain that glazed the roads like glass. Dispatch called around 8:40 p.m. and asked if I could do a quick run north on Highway 180. A traffic camera near an old turnout by the forest boundary had gone dark, and the system kept pinging it as active even though there was no feed. It wasn't urgent, they said, but since I was already on duty, I agreed. I remember the radio playing a countdown show, the hosts laughing too loudly. I shut it off and drove in silence, the headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the dark. The farther I went, the emptier it got. By the time I reached the turnout, there were no other cars, no cell signal, and the forest pressed in close on both sides of the road. The turnout was one of those forgotten spots, a wide gravel loop with a rusted information board and a single picnic table. It was supposed to be closed in winter, but people still pulled in sometimes to drink or watch fireworks from town in the distance. The camera pole stood near the tree line, its red indicator light blinking steadily. I parked, put on my reflective jacket, and walked over. The camera wasn't damaged, no broken wires, no obvious tampering. The indicator light blinked as if it were transmitting, but the lens was black, like it had been painted over from the inside. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the housing, and that's when I noticed footprints in the ice behind me. They hadn't been there when I got out of the truck. I was sure of it. They came from the tree line and stopped just a few feet behind where I was standing. The prints were deep, bare feet pressed into the frozen gravel, toes splayed unnaturally wide, no shoes, no socks. I told myself it was probably some drunk idiot, maybe someone who lost a bet. Still, I felt exposed standing there, so I turned around slowly. No one was there. The forest was silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just the faint ticking of my engine cooling and the soft blink of the red light above me. I backed toward my truck, keeping my eyes on the trees. The footprints didn't lead back into the forest. They just stopped. I got in, locked the doors, and called dispatch. Static crackled for a few seconds before the line cleared. I explained the camera situation and mentioned the footprints. The dispatcher laughed lightly and said maybe Bigfoot was ringing in the new year early. I forced a chuckle, but my hands were shaking. She told me to mark the camera as malfunctioning and head back. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the turnout. As I did, my headlights swept across the picnic table, and for a split second, I saw something underneath it. A face. Pale, stretched too tight over bone, eyes open and reflecting the light like an animal's. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out, heart pounding. When I got to the table, there was nothing there. No person. No tracks. Just frost-coated gravel and the old, warped wood. I didn't inspect anything else. I drove back toward town faster than I should have, trying to convince myself that exhaustion and the dark were messing with my head. By the time I reached the maintenance yard, it was close to midnight. Fireworks were already popping in the distance, echoing off the hills. I filed my report and went home. I wish that had been the end of it. At 11:58 p.m., my power went out. The house dropped into darkness so suddenly that it felt like being blindfolded. I checked my phone. No service. I tried the landline. Dead. The only sound was the wind picking up outside, rattling the windows. When midnight hit, I knew because every smoke detector in the house went off at once, not the intermittent low-battery chirp. Full, screaming alarms, overlapping and deafening. I ran through the house, waving my arms, checking for smoke, for fire. There was nothing. No smell, no haze. Just the alarms, howling like something was wrong with the air itself. Then they all stopped. At the same time. The silence afterward was worse. I stood in the living room, breathing hard, when I heard a knock at the front door. 3 slow knocks. I didn't answer. No one should have been out there. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept toward the door. The porch light was out with the rest of the power, so when I looked through the peephole, all I saw was darkness. The knocking came again, louder this time. 3 knocks. Precise. Patient. "Who is it?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer. I stepped back, every instinct telling me not to open that door. Then something brushed against the side of the house, a dragging sound along the siding. It moved slowly, deliberately, circling toward the back. I ran to the window over the sink and shined the flashlight outside. The beam caught the edge of the yard, the snow-dusted ground, and then movement. Bare feet, stepping carefully, heels lifted, toes curling into the dirt. The legs were too long, joints bending the wrong way, skin mottled and gray like it had never seen sunlight. I stumbled back and dropped the flashlight. When I picked it up again, the yard was empty. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light I could power, using battery lanterns, listening. Around 3 a.m., the power came back on by itself. The house felt normal again, almost mocking in its quiet. The next morning, I told myself I needed rest. I took a shower, made coffee, and tried to reset my brain. That's when I noticed the mud on my kitchen floor, wet footprints, barefoot, leading from the back door to the hallway and stopping outside my bedroom. The back door was still locked. I called in sick and drove straight to the sheriff's office. I showed them photos I'd taken of the prints and explained everything. They listened politely, took notes, and asked if I'd been drinking the night before. I hadn't. They suggested stress, lack of sleep, maybe a carbon monoxide issue. They sent a deputy to check my house. He found nothing. That night, just before midnight, the camera alert came in again. Same location, same turnout. This time, every sensor in that area went live at once. Motion, heat, audio. Dispatch called me directly and asked if I could head out since I was the one familiar with the site. I said no. I quit my job 2 days later. I put the house up for sale and stayed with my sister in Phoenix until it closed. I tried to move on, to forget the sound of those alarms and the shape of those footprints. But every New Year's Eve since then, something happens. Sometimes it's a knock on my apartment door at midnight, even when I don't answer. Sometimes it's my phone lighting up with a notification from a camera system I no longer have access to, showing a black screen with a blinking red light. Once, I woke up to wet footprints beside my bed, stopping just inches from my face. Last year, I finally looked out the window when I heard the knock. Standing under the streetlight was a figure with my exact height and build, head tilted, smiling with a mouth that didn't quite fit its face. It raised its hand, bare fingers tapping in a slow, familiar rhythm against the door. 3 knocks. Whatever started that night in the forest didn't stay there. It learned my schedule, my habits, my face. And every year, when the old one ends and the new one begins, it comes back to remind me that some things don't reset at midnight. Story the end. I never liked New Year's Eve, even before what happened. It always felt forced, like everyone agreed to pretend the calendar flipping over meant something had been fixed. But the year it happened, I went anyway. I told myself it would be normal. I told myself nothing bad ever happened to me, that the stories you hear are always about other people. I was wrong. It was December 31st, 2016, and the cold in western Pennsylvania cut straight through my coat. The town was small, one of those places where the main street still had a diner with cracked vinyl booths and a hardware store that smelled like dust and oil. We were all home for the holidays, me, my college roommate Eric, and a few people we'd grown up with. Someone suggested a party at an old rental house just outside town, a place people used for bonfires and weekend drinking because it sat far enough from neighbors that no one complained. By the time we pulled up, it was already dark. The house looked wrong even before we went inside. It was a 2-story farmhouse with sagging porch steps and windows that reflected the headlights like blank eyes. Someone joked that it looked haunted. Someone always makes that joke. We laughed and carried the coolers in anyway. Inside, the heat barely worked. Space heaters hummed in corners, and everyone stayed in their jackets. Music played too loud through cheap speakers, the bass rattling loose picture frames on the walls. I remember thinking how empty the house felt despite the noise, like it swallowed sound instead of holding it. People drank fast. It was New Year's Eve, after all. Shots lined up on the kitchen counter, cheap champagne chilling in a bathtub upstairs. Eric disappeared early with a girl from high school I barely recognized. I stuck close to the people I knew best, but as the night went on, even they drifted away into smaller groups, private conversations, closed doors. Around 11, the power flickered. It was just a blink, the lights cutting out and coming back on, but it drew a collective groan from the room. Someone yelled that the house always did that. Someone else said the wiring was ancient. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach anyway. There's a certain feeling you get when a place reminds you that it can fail at any moment. At 11:30, my phone lost service. No bars. I tried again, turning it on airplane mode and back. Nothing. I wasn't the only one. A few people complained, waving their phones in the air like that might help. Someone said the area always had spotty reception. Another person said it didn't matter because we were all together anyway. That was the last time the night felt normal. I went upstairs to use the bathroom, stepping over coats piled on the stairs. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic I couldn't place. The bathroom light flickered when I flipped the switch, buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. I locked the door, more out of habit than fear. While I was washing my hands, I heard something outside the room. Not footsteps exactly. More like something being dragged, slow and uneven, across the floorboards. I froze, listening. Laughter erupted somewhere downstairs, drowning it out. I told myself it was nothing. Old house, old sounds. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I went back downstairs, my skin prickling for no good reason. Eric still hadn't come back. I checked the kitchen, the living room, the porch. Someone told me he'd gone outside to smoke. That made sense. I grabbed my coat and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was sharp and smelled like snow. A few people stood near the tree line, cigarettes glowing orange. Eric wasn't there. I asked if they'd seen him. One guy shrugged and said Eric went around back with the girl. I walked around the side of the house, my boots crunching on frozen gravel. The backyard sloped down toward the woods, dark and quiet. A single floodlight hung over the back door, flickering like the bathroom light had. I called Eric's name. My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the trees. No answer. I was about to turn back when I noticed the back door was slightly open. I don't know why that bothered me so much. People had been going in and out all night, but the door hadn't been open when we arrived. I knew that. I stepped closer and pushed it the rest of the way. The kitchen inside was dark. I flicked the light switch. Nothing happened. The hum of music was gone. I realized then that I couldn't hear anything from the party at all. No laughter, no bass, just the faint whistle of wind through broken weather stripping. My heart started to pound. I stepped inside, my boots echoing too loudly on the tile. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, catching the edges of counters and chairs. Everything looked off. Chairs were overturned. Bottles lay shattered on the floor, glass crunching under my feet. I called out again, louder this time. My voice came back to me flat and empty. I backed toward the door, suddenly desperate to get out, but it slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the frame. I screamed. The sound bounced around the kitchen, but no one answered. I ran to the door and yanked on it. It wouldn't budge. The handle turned uselessly in my hand. Panic rose fast, hot and dizzying. I ran through the house, my phone light shaking as I went. The living room was a mess. Furniture was pushed against the walls. The speakers lay on the floor, wires ripped out. The space heaters were tipped over, cold to the touch. Everyone was gone. I ran upstairs, taking the steps two at a time. Doors stood open, rooms empty. Coats still piled on the stairs, but no people. No signs of a struggle I could understand. Just absence. In the last bedroom, I found Eric's phone. It lay on the floor near the bed, the screen cracked. When I picked it up, the lock screen lit my face in harsh white light. No service. The time read 11:58 p.m. That was when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, wet, right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam slicing through the room. Nothing stood there. But the breathing didn't stop. It moved, circling me, always just outside the edge of the light. I backed into the wall, my heart slamming so hard I thought I might pass out. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was silence so complete my ears rang. Then something whispered my name. It didn't come from one place. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The voice sounded like Eric, but wrong, stretched thin, like a recording played at the wrong speed. I ran. I bolted for the stairs, nearly falling as I took them. I hit the front door at a full sprint and threw my weight against it. It flew open, and I tumbled onto the porch, gasping, sobbing, freezing air burning my lungs. The yard was empty. The cars were gone, all of them. Where there had been a dozen vehicles parked along the drive, there was now nothing but frozen dirt and tire tracks leading away into the dark. I stumbled down the steps and into the road, screaming for help. My voice echoed back at me, small and helpless. The town was miles away. No houses, no lights. Behind me, the house lights flicked on, one by one, glowing warm and inviting. Music started up again, muffled through the walls. I turned slowly. Through the front window, I could see people moving inside. Laughing. Dancing. I recognized them. Friends. Faces I'd known my whole life. Eric stood near the kitchen, a drink in his hand, smiling. I pounded on the glass, screaming his name. He didn't look at me. None of them did. It was like I didn't exist. The front door opened. I stumbled back, expecting someone to come out to finally see me. Instead, a man stepped onto the porch. I didn't recognize him. He was tall, dressed in an old-fashioned coat, his face pale and smooth like wax. His eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too deep. "You're early," he said calmly. I shook my head, words failing me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "It's almost midnight," he continued, glancing at a watch that had no hands. Someone always stays behind. He smiled then, and I saw that his teeth were filed down to points. The house behind him erupted in cheers. I heard the countdown begin. 10, 9. The man stepped aside and gestured toward the open door. 8, 7. I felt something grab my ankles, cold hands wrapping tight. I screamed as I was dragged backward across the porch, my nails scraping uselessly against the wood. 6, 5. The house lights flared bright, blinding me. 4, 3. I was pulled over the threshold, the door slamming shut behind me. 2, 1. Everything went black. I woke up in a hospital. They told me I was found wandering the road just after midnight, barefoot and hypothermic, screaming about a house that didn't exist. They said the place I described burned down in the 1980s, killing everyone inside during a New Year's Eve party. They never found Eric or anyone else who'd been at the party. I moved away after that. I don't celebrate New Year's Eve anymore. I lock my doors, I keep the lights on. Sometimes, just before midnight, my phone will buzz. No number, no message, just a notification that says, "You're early." Story the end. I used to think New Year's Eve was harmless. Noise, champagne, people pretending they were hopeful. The year this happened, I was 32 and living in a narrow duplex outside Toledo, Ohio. I worked second shift at a distribution warehouse and usually slept through midnight on December 31st. That year was different because my sister Erin insisted I come to her place. She had just moved into a rental house on the edge of town near an old industrial park that had been half abandoned since the late 90s. She told me it would be small. Just her boyfriend Kyle, and a couple of neighbors. I didn't want to go. I remember standing in my kitchen around 6 p.m., staring at my phone while Erin's name buzzed on the counter. I had a headache and a bad feeling that I couldn't explain. I ignored the call, then felt guilty and texted back that I'd be there after work. The roads were slick with freezing rain when I drove over. Fireworks were already popping somewhere in the distance, sharp cracks echoing off empty buildings. Erin's street had poor lighting, and the houses were spread out farther than most neighborhoods in town. Her place sat at the end of a dead-end road that backed up to a chain-link fence separating the houses from the industrial park. Beyond that fence were dark warehouses, rusted tanks, and a tangle of overgrown weeds. Inside, the house smelled like beer and crock-pot meatballs. There were only 4 of us: Erin, Kyle, and the couple next door, Mark and Alicia. They were friendly enough, the kind of people who laughed too loud when they drank. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker, and a TV in the living room showed a countdown special from New York. I noticed right away that the back door was unlocked. I asked Erin about it, and she said Kyle liked to step out back to smoke. The backyard was small and ended at the fence. Beyond it, the industrial park looked like a black ocean of shapes and shadows. Around 9 p.m., Kyle went outside to smoke. He left the door cracked open, letting in a blade of cold air. A few minutes later, he came back in looking annoyed. "There's someone back there," he said. We laughed at him, thinking he was joking, but he shook his head. "I'm serious." I heard footsteps on the other side of the fence. Someone was walking back and forth. Mark said it was probably a drunk cutting through the lot. Erin told Kyle to lock the door if it bothered him. He did, and the conversation moved on. By 10 p.m., we were all drinking more. The mood got louder, looser. That's when the power went out. It wasn't dramatic at first. The TV shut off, the music died, and the lights went dark. Erin groaned, and Kyle pulled out his phone to use the flashlight. The street outside was pitch black too, which meant it wasn't just their house. "Probably the ice," Mark said. "It'll be back." We lit a couple of candles Erin had on the kitchen counter. The house took on that strange floating feeling you get when modern noise disappears. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic, just the wind brushing the siding and the occasional pop of fireworks far away. That's when we heard the knock. It came from the back door, not loud, just 3 slow taps. Kyle froze with his phone light pointed at the door. Erin laughed nervously and said, "That's not funny." "I didn't do it," Mark said. The knock came again, 3 taps, even spacing, not frantic, not drunk. Kyle asked who it was. No answer. I remember a sick pressure forming behind my eyes. Every instinct told me not to open that door. Erin whispered that it was probably someone asking for help because of the blackout. She said she couldn't leave someone outside in that cold. Kyle cracked the door open a few inches. His phone light cut into the dark backyard, showing the fence and the wet ground. No one was there. Then, from the side of the house, we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate steps moving along the wall. Kyle slammed the door shut and locked it. We all started talking at once. Mark said someone was messing with us. Alicia wanted to call the police, but Aaron pointed out that we had no signal inside the house. Another knock came, this time on the kitchen window. Harder. A fist, not knuckles. We backed away from the window. The candlelight shook as Aaron's hands trembled. A voice spoke from outside. It was calm and low. "Please open the door. It's freezing." The voice didn't sound panicked. It didn't sound desperate. It sounded patient. Kyle shouted that we were calling the cops. The voice didn't respond. Instead, something scratched along the siding, a long, dragging sound, like fingernails or metal. It moved from the kitchen window toward the front of the house. That's when the banging started at the front door. It was violent, sudden, shaking the frame. Alicia screamed. Mark grabbed a fireplace poker from the corner. Kyle told us to go upstairs. We rushed up the narrow staircase, nearly tripping over each other. Aaron's bedroom was at the end of the hall. We crammed inside and locked the door. The banging downstairs continued, mixed with that same calm voice, now muffled by walls. "Open the door," it said. "You don't want to start the year like this." Those words made my stomach drop. It sounded like the person knew exactly what night it was, exactly what fear to use. The banging stopped abruptly. Silence followed. Too complete. We listened for footsteps, breathing, anything. Minutes passed. Fireworks boomed somewhere far away, mocking the quiet inside the house. Kyle said he was going to look. Aaron begged him not to. Mark insisted they go together. They opened the bedroom door and crept downstairs. I stayed with Aaron and Alicia, pressed against the wall. We heard the front door creak open. Kyle called out. No answer. Then Mark shouted, "Kyle!" There was a thud, like a body hitting wood. Aaron screamed and ran for the stairs. I followed without thinking. The front door stood wide open, letting in cold air. Mark lay on the floor near the entryway, his head bleeding. Kyle was gone. Mark was conscious, but disoriented. He kept saying Kyle had stepped outside to look, and someone had rushed him from the darkness. He couldn't describe the person. Just a shape. Too tall. Moving wrong. We dragged Mark back upstairs and locked ourselves in the bathroom, the only room with no windows. Aaron sobbed uncontrollably. Alicia tried to call 911 again and again, but there was still no signal. From downstairs, we heard footsteps moving through the house. Drawers opening, cabinets slamming. The intruder wasn't in a hurry. He was exploring. The voice came back, closer now. "You left the door open," it said. "That's rude." Something heavy hit the bottom of the stairs. Then another hit. It sounded like someone was trying to break the staircase railing. At 11:58 p.m., fireworks exploded outside, louder than before. The house shook slightly with the noise. Aaron looked at me with wild eyes and said, "He's waiting for midnight." I don't know why she said that, but it felt true. Everything about this felt deliberate, ritualistic. The footsteps stopped. Silence again. At exactly midnight, when distant cheers echoed through the night, the bathroom door handle began to turn. Slowly, carefully, testing the lock. Alicia prayed out loud. Mark groaned and tried to stand, slipping in his own blood. The handle stopped turning. The voice spoke softly, right outside the door. "Happy New Year." The door exploded inward. The lock shattered and the door slammed against the wall. A man stood there, illuminated by the flickering hallway light from a battery lantern he carried. His face was pale, his eyes too bright. He wore a heavy coat and work boots caked with mud. In his hand was a crowbar. What struck me most was his expression. He wasn't angry. He wasn't excited. He looked fulfilled. He stepped inside and swung the crowbar at Mark without hesitation. Aaron lunged at him, screaming Kyle's name. The man shoved her aside like she weighed nothing. I don't remember deciding to run. I just did. I pushed past him while he was distracted and sprinted down the hall and down the stairs, out the open front door, into the freezing night. I ran barefoot down the road, screaming until my throat burned. Fireworks burst overhead, bright and indifferent. I pounded on doors, slipping on ice, until someone finally opened and pulled me inside. The police came quickly after that. They found Aaron and Alicia alive but injured. Mark survived, barely. Kyle was found the next morning in the industrial park, beaten and left in the weeds. They never found the man. The police said it was likely a transient who wandered in during the blackout, someone looking for shelter who turned violent. That explanation never sat right with me, because a week later, Erin called me crying. She had gone back to the house to collect her things. In the kitchen, scratched into the wall near the back door, were the words, "Thank you for letting me in." I don't celebrate New Year's Eve anymore. I stay home, lock my doors, and keep the lights on. When midnight comes, I don't count down. I don't cheer. I listen. Story, the end. The snow had started falling lightly around 10 p.m., dusting the streets of the small Massachusetts town in a quiet, almost serene way. The kind of snow that made everything look peaceful, like the world was holding its breath. For most people, New Year's Eve meant parties, champagne, and fireworks. But for the Callahan family, it meant something entirely different. Their tradition had been simple: spend the evening together at home, board games, snacks, and a fireplace that cast a warm glow over the living room. That year, things had felt off from the beginning. It wasn't a specific event, just a sense that something was wrong, a tension in the air that no one could name. John Callahan, the father, tried to ignore it. His wife, Diane, had noticed it too. Even their 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, seemed quieter than usual, scrolling through her phone with a distracted look that didn't belong to her normal, cheerful self. The first odd thing happened around 11 p.m. John went to the kitchen to get more snacks, and when he returned, he saw Diane standing by the window, staring out into the dark street. "You're early," he said, thinking she was watching for fireworks. "I'm just listening," she said softly. John frowned. "Listening to what?" "Nothing," Diane replied, turning away. But he noticed she was pale, more than usual. The shadows from the streetlights made her look almost unreal. He shook his head and went back to the living room. Around 11:15, Sarah came running in from her room. "Mom, Dad, you've got to see this," she said, holding her phone. On the screen was a photo she hadn't taken, an image of their living room. Their living room. But the photo showed something standing behind them, something that shouldn't be there. It was dark, tall, blurry at the edges, but undeniably humanoid. John and Diane looked at each other. "Probably a glitch," John said, though his voice was uncertain. "Phones do that sometimes." Sarah shook her head. "No, I didn't take it. I swear. Look at the timestamp. It's just now." They laughed it off, nervously, trying to reassure themselves. It was just a trick of the phone's camera, a shadow from the corner of the room. Anything but what it really was. At 11:30, the power flickered, just for a second, then stabilized. Diane muttered something about the old wiring in the house, and John agreed. But then the lights flickered again, longer this time, and the warmth from the fireplace dimmed. A cold draft swept through the living room. "That's strange," Diane said. "I'll check the breaker," John said, heading toward the basement. He didn't return immediately, which was unusual. Normally, the basement was a quick fix. Diane and Sarah heard a strange sound, a low, almost imperceptible whispering, like a conversation just out of reach. Diane went to call John, but her phone had no signal. The landline was dead. The whispering grew louder, moving through the house, echoing from room to room, but always just beyond comprehension. By 11:45, Diane was frightened enough to gather Sarah in the living room. The whispering had become more defined. She could make out words, short phrases, fractured and chilling. "Not yours. Stay. Watch. Don't leave." It seemed to come from the corners of the room, from the shadows themselves. John emerged from the basement, pale and shaking. I didn't see anything down there, but something's wrong," he said. He refused to elaborate, which only made Diane more anxious. As midnight approached, the family tried to distract themselves, turning on the TV, hoping for the countdown and some sense of normalcy. But the screen flickered, showing static, then briefly images of the living room, but empty, except for dark shapes standing behind them. Then the images shifted. The shapes moved closer, always just out of reach, always in the background, never fully visible. Diane started to cry. "John, we need to leave. We can't stay here. Something's watching us." John grabbed coats and shoes, insisting they go outside. But the moment they stepped into the hallway, the temperature dropped sharply, their breath fogging in front of them. A presence seemed to press in, a weight on their chests. The whispering returned, now louder and more insistent. "Stay. Don't leave. You belong." The front door wouldn't budge, not with force, not with the key. It was as if the house itself had shifted, locking them inside. Panic set in. Sarah screamed when she saw a shadow detach from the corner of the hallway, moving toward them. It was tall, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs that bent at angles they shouldn't. Its face was featureless, smooth black, but somehow they could feel its gaze piercing through them. They backed into the living room, trying to find another way out. But every door, every window was sealed. The whispering now spoke clearly, a chorus of voices overlapping. Not yours. Stay. Forever. Join us. John tried to grab the shadow, thinking it might be a hallucination, a trick of the mind, but his hands passed through air. The shadow reached out, and a cold unlike anything they had ever felt seeped into their bones. They fell to their knees, gasping, the room spinning around them. Then the clocks in the house, all of them, in every room, started counting backward. Seconds, minutes, hours, spinning faster and faster. The family clung to each other as the whispering intensified, screaming their names, repeating the phrase, "Not yours, belong, belong." Midnight came. The countdown that should have brought fireworks and joy brought only terror. In that moment, time seemed to fracture. The walls of the house stretched, the ceiling warped, shadows crawling along every surface, moving of their own accord. John could see shapes in the corners, figures that weren't fully human, faces twisted in silent screams, eyes hollow and black. Sarah felt a hand, cold, invisible, brush against her arm. She screamed, and suddenly the whispering stopped. The silence was heavier than any sound. But when she turned, she realized something worse. Diane and John were staring at her, but their faces were wrong. Elongated, pale, their eyes black voids like the shapes she had seen in the shadows. Sarah ran to the door, pounding on it, screaming for them to stop. But the house did not respond. She was alone now, the family transformed into the entities that had haunted her all night. Their mouths opened in silent screams, reaching for her, but she was too terrified to move. Then the TV flickered again. Static. And through the static, she saw herself, running through the living room, trying to escape. But in the reflection, she also saw more figures standing behind her and her, countless shadows pressed against the walls, the ceiling, the floor. They were endless, like the house had always belonged to them, and she had trespassed. The lights went out completely. When they returned, Sarah was alone. The house was quiet. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the world frozen and silent. But inside the living room, the fireplace was burning, though it should not have been lit. The TV was on, static filling the screen, and in the corner of the room a shadow moved, slowly, deliberately, toward her. No one in town saw the Callahans again. When neighbors checked the house weeks later, it appeared empty, abandoned as it had always been. But every New Year's Eve, the house seemed different. Lights flickered inside, shadows moved behind the windows, and sometimes faintly, a whisper carried across the street. Stay, belong, forever. Story the end.